in October, I think, with a bunch of new features and stuff. So.
Let's look at that.
Yeah. It's automatic. They automatically roll it in.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to take an extra?
No, I
You be okay? Okay.
I did. How are you doing? Good.
Hey.
That's for you. So if you could stamp it, just a copy.
Okay. I have to stamp it tomorrow because it's after
That's fine.
5.
That's
Okay.
You don't say. It's very hard to do.
Good, sir. How are you? So, we have a problem. Several people come up and ask me why my name is.
That's Todd just said.
And how did you get the key spot on the
Okay.
big side? You're in the middle.
You should probably let me know what order you want all the items in.
What are you doing to me, man? I thought we had something.
We gotta keep it down. There's no barroom brawls allowed in the council chambers. No, they're.
Yeah, it's all good.
We haven't seen each other for a while.
Alright, let's see.
What's the T?
The T. So I figured it out. Did you figure it out?
No.
It means gossip.
Well, I knew that's
Yeah,
what it meant,
that's
but
all
how
it
did they get
means.
to T?
Well, for the talk. What's the talk? But they don't use the word talk. So I said, well, why don't you guys just use the G? They look at me like, get it, gossip, G, talk. Why would you use a different letter to me? I don't know. So, all right. She looked at me like,
Do you know that Danny buys a portion of the sales tax revenue from the outlet mall? And they don't have to provide any services? Can you imagine? And
so this here. This. Anything that's small print here, because I know how he likes to make small
no, they
print.
don't want to share.
No.
The county made, what I heard was the county of Riverside made that deal because they were gonna annex. And rather than annex, they said, okay, we'll give you a portion, you don't have to supply the services. So it's like free money every year and they still can't balance it?
Right on time. I will open the City of Beaumont City Council meeting workshop session at 6 p.m. For Wednesday, September 26th, 2018 at 6 o'clock p.m. Could I have a call to order, please?
Councilmember Santos?
Here.
Councilmember White?
Here.
Councilmember Lara?
Hip.
Mayor Pro Tem Martinez?
Here.
And Mayor Carroll.
Here. Thank you. We don't have the pledge on here. We should still do the pledge, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
They were testing you.
Okay, I caught it. Okay. Chief, would you do the pledge for us, please?
I would. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Public comment. I will open the public comment period at 6:01. And public comment, any one person may address the City Council on any matter not on this agenda. If you wish to speak, please fill out a public comment form provided at the back table and give it to the city clerk. There is a 3-minute time limit on public comments. There will be no sharing or passing of time to another person. State law prohibits the council from discussing or taking actions brought up by your comments. Do we have public comment?
We do. I have a request from.
Excuse me, Nicole. Okay, go ahead, sorry.
I have a request from Dave Castaldo. He did put in 2 requests, one to speak to the successor agency and one to the city council. However, I did advise him that tonight this body is not meeting as the successor agency, so I would accept one, but you can overrule that should you want.
Thank you.
Dave Castaldo?
So a point of clarification, Mayor, am I speaking to the city council or to the successor agency?
Well, I opened the public comments for the city council, so you could go ahead. You are also welcome to leave behind any additional written comments that you want us to have as a public document. You're welcome to do that.
As you know, myself, my wife, and my company is involved in a lawsuit. At first, I'm a little irritated about what's happening, and then I take a step back and I realize that everybody here that I'm dealing with was not the same people that I dealt with 20 years ago. And this council, the staff, have no idea of what happened. The SCO report stated that the city didn't have any of the documents. And I will quote from the SCO report, the city will be lucky if they could collect anything on that note. And that's out of the document. My lawyer copied everything of his file and provided a lot of that documentation to you. I don't believe the city council has ever seen that or fully understand the real heart of the case. And it basically, one thing that I would have asked for, and I've always wanted, was a certificate of completion of my on-site improvements. We made a deal, Mr. Santos, I want to let you know what happened. I bought a piece of property from the city of Beaumont. They forgot to tell me that it was contaminated. They really did. There's this document in there that informed the city that they knew that property was contaminated in 1987. I found out 3 months after escrow closed. I worked with the city. We worked together. I did my best to make sure that the city saved money, and we worked it out. We made an agreement in 2005, a settlement agreement. My property was reduced from a cost of $68,000 down to $46,000, which left $22,000 credit. I spent over $30,000 in attorney fees. So I really didn't get a credit. It actually cost me more. But we worked it out. There were certain provisions in that settlement agreement. One of the major provisions was that I do off-site improvements and that I was relieved of those off-site improvements. It states there in the document. The city even says in the document that I was relieved of those off-site improvements. Yet the city, since 2005, never filed a certificate of completion with the County of Riverside that holds the title. This really isn't right. You guys are reasonable. I've never been unreasonable in the city. I've been very fair, and I'm really at a point where I can't participate and help the city the way I would like to. I'm a very active member in this community. But we have this little friction going on that's causing a lot of problems for both sides. So what I would ask you to do, I'm not demanding, I'm asking you to consider. 2 members of an ad hoc committee, let's discuss this. Todd can be a part of it. There doesn't have to be anything decided, but you guys can answer the questions and at least let me present to the council what has happened over the last 18 to 20 years. I would appreciate the consideration.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
No other speaker.
I'll have to over my voice tonight. I will close public comment period at 6:07. Discussion items. Item 1, discussion and direct to city staff regarding the fiscal year 2019-20 budget. Excuse me. Staff?
Yes, ma'am. We're going to get a hot shot PowerPoint presentation fired up here for you in a second.
Are you okay with those font sizes?
They are. Everyone is treated fairly and equally for these font sizes.
All right, just checking.
The top one is bigger.
It is.
The bottom ones are not brighter, though. I don't know. Okay, so again, I appreciate council taking the opportunity to spend some time with us this evening. I know your time's valuable. We did pick a day where there was not football, NFL football on it, so we're successful in that regard, I think. But I kind of get excited about the beginning of a new fiscal year because that means we get to, within a few weeks, start the next fiscal year's budget. And so this is really kind of closer to the timeline for which we'll start our routine budgetary process. So no, I'm not clicking through. Okay. Probably so. So really the purpose for tonight, and it's really kind of a quick meeting, but really just kind of review, again, our city council goals, make sure that those goals, and we have those printed on this sheet of paper here. Just want to kind of review those real quickly. I know we just touched on those a few weeks ago, but just kind of look at that. Kind of refresh. We've updated our economic trends and factors a little bit. Kind of want to walk through there and kind of identify and make sure that we're still on target with regard to our assumptions that we have that we're building our fiscal forecast modeling off of. Then really kind of brainstorm with council and look at what objectives or things that you want us to begin trying to program or factor in for next year's budget. What we plan to do is get our staff working on their budgets here coming up in November. So we'll be doing some more data crunching on forecasting, and then staff will start working towards getting their line item budgets pulled together. Specific to public safety, we really, I think probably one of the most pressing staffing needs that we have right now is police protection. And so we've got some policy analysis and then some functional service analysis to look at. And so Chief's here to kind of walk us through those factors and then any additional direction that y'all may have for us moving forward. So the goals that we had for this year were, again, trying to improve upon our fiscal sustainability. And we're doing that through various different efforts. We're trying to maximize our resources, public safety enhancements that we're looking at, particularly with the West Side Fire Station. And then we've been working on the business recruitment and expansion concepts. Okay, thank you. Ready. Thank you. So again, here's kind of a review of those various efforts that we have out there. So one of the key issues for us on the fiscal sustainability side was trying to address and maintain those unrestricted or unobligated reserve funds. And so to kind of refresh your memory, we are projected to be at about 14.9% on the general fund. We're at 15% operationally on the wastewater fund. And then our other reserves are specified in the CFDs and other based on other programming and setup options that are out there. Again, the public safety, we've got the paramedic crew budgeted and funded for this year. I was talking with Chief Beach, and it looks like we'll be staffed right around January 1. So with the fires and the distractions that they've had, they've been kind of knocked off their program a little bit from what they had hoped to be. And we are working on our communication strategic plan. We've got that contract awarded. We've had our initial kickoff on that. And then we are working on the EDSP. So that is happening, and that's moving forward. And then we are pulling together the graphic documents, planning documents that we need for the downtown plaza concept. So those things are being finalized and will be forthcoming to you. Okay, so you've seen this graph before, and again, this graph really reflects how our levy has been changing. And it really kind of highlights that 6-year cycle, that 5 to 6 year economic cycle that we have. If you remember, we went, all the way back to 2008 and tried to pull forward our certified tax rolls and try to look at what those trends look like. And so again, you saw the dip of the recession. You saw how it came back out in gangbusters in 2014 with regard to the percent growth in AV, and then how it kind of tails back off. And that is kind of the longer term trend that we're now trying to roll in to our forecast. So one of the other critical factors was to try to look at what type of development is occurring that's growing the tax base. Again, about 80% of our tax base we've maintained through all the years has been single-family residential. And you're evenly split between commercial, retail, and industrial, so about 10% of each. So we are about half built out in terms of residential. We're about half built out in terms of your commercial and non-residential properties. So there's roughly about another 200 to 300 acres of commercial land to develop within the community. So the general plan update is approaching the perspective of a sustainable, appropriate mix of land uses. So when you look at the residential to the other, is that something that's attainable? Number one, from a functional mix, and then from a fiscal mix. Is that going to keep the city in a financially balanced situation? So we've been able to accomplish the growth and the change and evolution through the consumption of vacant, undeveloped land. And so you'll see now only about half of the undeveloped parcels in terms of value remains in the city. So again, no coincidence, half, 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 kind of all the way through. All right, okay. So how does that overall impact of the AV impact us in terms of what is happening on our property tax revenues? Again, the one thing to keep in mind is that before the economic downturn, we had about $220, $230 per capita or per single-family residential property that paid property taxes. So they paid about $230 per parcel. Today, you're collecting $217 per parcel. And that's after we had about a 9% increase in assessed value from the 16-year to the 17-year.
What was the number before?
It was right around $230. So
that was when?
That was back in 2007, 2008 range. So you dropped to about 100 and I think it was about 170 during the low. So you lost about 30 or so percent of your levy on single-family parcels due to the California Prop 8 and Prop 13 impact. So those don't affect commercial properties; they just affect residential properties. But so,
excuse me.
Yes.
So the 9%. I don't know what happened to my voice tonight. The 9% is an increase off of the 230, or is it an increase off of?
The 9% is the overall increase in your AV, in your assessed value. So from the 16-year to the 17-year, your total assessed value on your tax roll increased by about 8.9%. We don't know yet. We won't see the 18 number, until really after December. Yeah, December. Right. So based on what's actually levied and filed on the tax roll. So we won't see that information for another couple months. But presumably we're going to see somewhere in that 5%, 6% range is what we hope to see for next year. But when you look overall at the various changes that happen on your property tax levy, you begin to see how that affects you. But again, keeping in mind that really at the peak of this, you're talking about $7.1 million of property tax by the time you get to 2035. So even though you're roughly doubling your tax levy, your tax assessment, it's still only a fraction of your total general fund revenue. And that number hopefully becomes a smaller percentage over time as your sales tax and other revenue streams begin to kick in as you mature a little bit. But the key thing to note is if you really look at these trends, these bellies, I mean, these are going to be difficult valleys for the city to try to weather through. So as your staffing needs are growing and your services needs are growing, you're going to have some key areas of time where you actually are likely to see a significant reduction in your revenue on the general fund side. So that's what a lot of our modeling and a lot of our concern is based off of. And I've got some questions for you on some strategies to help manage that on into the future. So kind of hit on those in a little bit.
So the expected downward turn coming, in the near future, not reflected here in the projected property tax?
Right, it is reflected here.
How?
So you'll see right around, because we talked about.
So that's what you're considering, that
Right.
drop there going up? Okay.
Yes, right. So we see a retraction here, and then we see AV will rebound and grow back here. Then you'll have another trough right around here. And if you'll see, when you look at the historical trend here on the green bars, you'll kind of see how that trend kind of evolved over time. And all that ties back to our housing forecast and our population forecast that we affirmed earlier this year. So this is tracking consistent with all those numbers.
So when we were at our lowest at 170, is that a conservative approach, or is that more of a, on that dip?
Yeah, right there. So right in that 2010 range is where that hit. And so you'll see in this model that you see a similar effect that will happen to you in the 2029, 2030 range. And that's because we are planning for new development to begin to slow. Because you're going to start competing with, you already are starting to compete with Banning and Calamasa, so we're assuming that there's a certain level of market saturation that is bound to happen. Or there'll be a desire to go to the newer areas and kind of begin to bypass, already developed or pockets of already significantly developed area. That's a pretty common trend or transition that'll happen.
And, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
And why do you have the significant increase year over year from 2023 to 2027?
That's what I was gonna.
Right, because you've got growth in your secured and unsecured. So if you roll in your unsecured, you've got other assessments that are becoming. You've got inventory, you've got growth in vehicles, you've got other kind of capital that also begins to roll into that number. So this is a function of both your secured and your unsecured taxes. And so that's why when you look at the degradation of your value, your assessment coming into those upper years, you still see an overall upward trend because you got other segments of commercial and other segments of your unsecured that are also coming onto your tax roll.
And so your unsecured is vehicles and equipment?
It's vehicle, it's equipment, it could be inventory, it could be all those various things that are taxable, subject to property tax, but they're not fixed assets, buildings and land, specifically.
Just seems optimistic as opposed to the trend of more of a level, just.
Well, that's why I just asked about the dip. It seems
Right, but coming out of if you go back and you look at the dip, say, from 2008 to 2014, you don't see that $2 million, actually, $2 million increase in that kind of time frame. It just, I don't know.
Well, but keep in mind that you're growing AV, so you're growing property, you're growing development during these years as well, and so you're going to see bigger swings because you're going to have already established developed properties that suffer a retraction. You've got additional development that's coming in, so it's not a direct linear equation. You've got other kind of factors that are kind of coming into it that are influencing that number. We'll go back and do some more modeling. We'll be happy to go back and look at that some more. Make sure.
Thank you very much.
You betcha. If you go back and look at the sales and use, your overall trend has been a continual upward trend. So you've had continued growth. You've had a couple of those years. Again, the interesting aspect when you look at this was the recession era that happened in right around that 2009, that dropped you. You had that spike in 07, 08 with some new retail coming online. You had a little retraction, but you bumped right back up by the third year. So if you go back and compare to your property tax doesn't rebound that quickly. It takes about 5 years or so, to 3 to 4 years, to catch up from property that was devalued to come back up on tax roll. So, as you've got your continued population growth, you've got more people, you've got more local spending is the concept here. So I do want to do some additional work on this trend as well. I don't like to see the straight line. There's more of a cycle to look at than what we're showing here. But when we looked at our first multi-year forecast, it is built upon this model as you kind of go through. But it was interesting to me because overall, you can clearly see the trend line that occurred, in actual collections, over this time period. So one of the things that, and I'll provide some more detail for you as I build more of the database, but one of the things that I've been watching the last couple of quarters has been the per capita retail revenues generated within the city of Beaumont, and begin to benchmark that against other communities that we think we may be growing toward. If you look at Moreno Valley, if you look at Paris, you see what's going on there and what's evolving. You're looking at Redlands, looking at some other communities like that, what's happening. Looking at Banning, looking at Yucaipa, those things that are there. And so when you really contemplate what's happening, say, in Moreno Valley, they're a regional destination place. So with all the business and all the industry that's there, they import a lot of sales tax dollars coming into their community. So when you look at the revenue per capita, it's significantly higher than ours. Ours is really kind of more localized retail. This is what people in Beaumont and what people in Banning and Calamasa are spending, and that effect on our community. So as we expand and grow other, hopefully, retail, regional type or regional level of retail establishments, we hope to see that per capita sales tax number begins to grow, begins to appreciate a little bit faster. So,
why did it jump from 15 to 16?
15 to 16. One of the issues that you had, and one of the big thing that influenced us, was gas tax. And so gas was selling at lower volumes and at a lower cost. And so for several years, that had a major impact on our overall sales tax collection. I know it's kind of interesting, isn't it? All those things come home. So when you put all of our general fund revenues together, so you look at property tax and sales tax, you look at transfers in, we've run some rough modeling to look at everything over the next several years. This kind of gives you an idea about how the growth in the general fund looks in terms of financial resources. And this is important because when we start to look at longer term programming and fiscal planning, this is the umbrella, this is the envelope that we're planning within. So the critical thing for us is, okay, how accurate is that envelope? And if we come to you next year and we say, hey, let's add this program, or y'all say, hey, add this program, we can come back and say, okay, we're good up to this point, or it gives us an idea about how to size that effort to where we need to try to get to. One of the things that Kyle and I have been doing is we've reached out to economics professor at Claremont McKenna. And been talking to him about maybe working with us to help us prepare some economic models that we can begin to apply. There actually was a very large level of interest to work on that, and especially maybe to even assign some graduate students or seniors to that project. The catch to that is that they don't want to just do Beaumont. They want to do several communities and begin to establish some trends. But this fits right in line with some of the research, the applied research that they're working on. And so we had a very, very good conversation. They've already given us some ideas in terms of some benchmarks. So we're trying to develop a much more scientific regression, multiple regression kind of model to begin to look at the various effects on economic trends. So we're looking at that. One of the key issues will be imports, because what happens in LA and Long Beach and San Diego is going to directly reflect on us, because our working population, a lot of them are direct support to the industries in those areas. And as imports begin to dry up or there is an impact there, we'll almost kind of be an indicator for an overall economic trend. We'll probably be at the beginning of that economic downturn, and we might be the last to feel it, because as a company begins to retract, they begin to cut back. They may let employees go. They may they may curtail what they're buying from other suppliers, and then our folks are going to feel that first. So we're working through there, and that's the thing that I think will be very, very critical as we try to really refine this moving forward. Ultimately, I'd love to grow from a 5 to a 10-year fiscal model, so we can kind of really drill in. So again, if you look at our sewer fund, this is reflecting our rate adjustments. And so you can kind of begin to see that in 2017 to 2018, as we've had rate adjustments that have started to kick in, you're beginning to see what those revenues are looking like on the sewer fund. If you look at expenses, what you'll find is that as we get into 2020, you begin to feel the first full fiscal year of the debt service for the $90 million that we're closing on, I guess, tomorrow for the sewer plant project. One thing to note, so when you look at prior year revenue, if you were to look at budget and audits, it may look a little bit different than these numbers, because as we've tried to prepare apples to apples to begin to run this trend, we're looking at revenues that we were planning, that we're programming for deployment and application for the sewer fund operations for the oncoming years. So we're trying to make that apples to apples. So what these numbers reflect are your rate revenues plus connection fees, impact fees that are being brought in through your annual connections that are then being applied towards debt service and towards capital. So this model also has you growing a significant amount on unallocated revenues. And that's because our rate study anticipated that we're going to start to have some money that we set aside towards capital replacement and repair. And so those are not factored in as line item budgets. So there's some additional dollars that you're going to have. And if I remember the rate study correctly, there's probably right around $10 to $12 million over a period of the next 10 years or so that are additional revenues above operations and debt service that you need that goes towards your capital replacement. So those are dollars that we'll model more, we'll begin to program, and you'll see those reflected in your CIPs as we move on.
This also takes into consideration the rate adjustment for existing commercial customers that we had that large gap on.
Well, what we are going to do is year to year, we're going to analyze our revenues, and if we're doing better, then we'll come back to you with some recommended rate adjustments. So, right now we had 6% program for next year, and then we've got 5, 5, 5, and so it may be 6, 5, 4, 3, or 6, 444. You know, so we'll model that, and we'll be asking you for direction on where you want to go with your rate. So as we do better, as we, you know, have more customers, or if we add commercial, or as we go back and we reevaluate existing customers and look at what adjustments need to happen there, then that can come back and allow us to adjust rates across the board. So the rate study established the max, the cap on what our rate adjustments can be, but it also said that we're going to come back to you year over year and say, hey, here's what we're doing, here's where we should set the rate moving forward. And so that's over a 5-year window. So, you know, once we get into year 4, 3 or 4, we need to go back and refresh our study and start another Prop 218 process after that.
And before you leave the expenses, so when you mentioned about, you factored in the replacement of equipment as we go forward, the equipment under the new design plan might be more expensive than the equipment that we've used in the past because it's more sophisticated. Is that built into the model for replacing the equipment, that it's a different, more sophisticated level of equipment?
Not within a 5-year window.
Okay.
And so, because all of that's going to be new equipment. So you're not likely to see, you better not see any major failures that are not
in
warranty.
5 years, no.
Right, so.
But going forward, it will.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And the same may be true for the
Right.
personnel costs.
Right. And so this does not show as an operational cost your capital replacement or your capital reserve. So those are things that we'll be presenting to you that will show where you're allocating over, because those are going to go over to the capital budget, to the CIP, and will not be reflected in your annualized operating. So, but what this does show is the $5 million of max annual debt service that you've got coming. So you're right around $5,050,000 with your final debt service schedule in your peak, and that kicks in by the time you get to year 2020. So you've got a small number, about 1.9 million program for this year. Next year you're about a little over 4 million. And then you get into your max amount and starting in 2020, which is your $5,050,000. But this factors in what we're forecasting with the 5-year fiscal pro forma for the new sewer plant operation. So this anticipates transitioning out, bringing the operation in-house in 2020 as we start to bring the plant online. So, and primarily, really, when you look at the general fund and the sewer fund, I think these policies are really most applicable to most of those. But again, I think the multi-year projections are critical, and that's something that we're maturing and we're trying to develop as we're going. We're at the elementary school phase right now, but we're getting better. Looking at results-based budgets. So instead of saying we're budgeting to the number we have on hand, or we think we're going to have on hand. So instead of saying, oh, well, you know, we have a nice 20% increase in the budget for next year, let's go ahead and spend all of it. We're saying, no, listen, we're looking at the programming levels. Are we trying to maintain certain levels? Are we trying to grow certain levels? And then, so we're budgeting to that effort. Now, we know that we're going to hit recessionary cycles. And we know that we're going to have years where your revenue is going to be short of what you need to maintain services. So what do we do in those situations? So again, you know, conservatism, you know, fiscal conservatism isn't spending to what you got and being balanced at zero. It is having the plan, understanding what you want to do, and then having a strategy to stay along that line. Now, if we have prolonged periods, let's say beyond 3 years, where your revenues are still down, you know, we'll be watching for that. And our fiscal modeling should be anticipating that. You know, one of the things that kind of bothers me, and I literally lose a lot of sleep over this, is if you look at history, and you look even at our history, by 2020, 2021, we should see a recession. If you look at all the key indicators, the national, regional, and international indicators, they're not flagging a recession. They're not. But when you talk to economists, 80% of economists now are saying that in 2021 we'll see a recession. but there's nothing to indicate it, nothing at all. So we're in a brave new world to a certain respects. So we will, at that point, have had the longest sustained economic growth stretch in recorded history, right? So anyway, so what do? So we're going to have some years, maybe a little bit better than we think. We know there's going to be a downturn at some point. So that's when we get to the reserve fund management strategy. With that, we've already established a baseline that 15% of our maintenance and operation budget, so that's what it takes to just run the basic duties of the city at whatever program levels we have decided to fund. So 15% of that needs to be set aside into reserve. And from there, we have those monies. If a catastrophic event happens, we've got, a couple months to operate. At that point, then what happens if we exceed 15%? We need to contemplate where we'd have planned drawdowns. So we hit the belly, within the timeline that we think of, and we have a program subtraction from that reserve. That really ought to happen within that 16 to 25% range. That's a range that we should work within there to kind of create that buffer for us. If we're to a point where we're adding more than we're going above 25%, so anything above that, I think, depending on what number value we're talking about, that's a prime opportunity then to take some of those dollars and apply those to some one-time expenditures. So there'll be roads to do, there'll be equipment, there's going to be key things, building, maintenance, there's going to be things out there that you're going to want to tackle. Or identify and set funds aside, to fund things over the years. It could be parks, police station, it could be various things. So really kind of looking at a kind of established strategy on how we would look to deploy those funds. So 15% your baseline, 16 to 25 is your flex. That's your buffer for your downturn. You don't want to live off of those more than 2 or 3 years. Because you don't want to eat into that 15%. If you get to year 2 and there's no end in sight, you begin the process of retracting your budgets and making the adjustments that you need to make to address that. So that is kind of the overall strategy that I want to, just kind of want to make sure y'all are comfortable with that, because that's kind of where I'll go to start building, some of our longer term fiscal forecast information off of that. Well, I guess Milana will use that information. So, just kind of a reminder, we just brought our second senior accountant in. So Lisa just joined us Monday, right? So she's handling the daily accounting, accounts payable, accounts receivable side. That's going to relieve Jennifer Eustachian to begin to be able to concentrate on our capital and our CFD stuff. We've been working with Webb to help begin to develop some budgeting models for all of our improvement areas. And so we're working through there. We've got our first multi-year flush at our public safety assessments. So we had programmed, I think, 40,000 this year. Next year, there's right around 140,000 programmed. And then it grows to about a $250,000 within the next couple of years. So you're going to have some serious dollars to begin to help address your services in your CFD side. And we'll have the modeling and detailed reporting in place now to show our residents how much we're forecasting to come from their specific improvement area and where those dollars are being applied. Are they applied within their IAs or within their neighborhoods or within the city as a whole? And then, I don't know, do y'all want to discuss any of that stuff first? Or you want to talk about policing real quick?
Preference?
I just keep going.
Okay.
I think keep going.
Okay, we're going to keep going. Okay, so, and I'm going to get way over my head here, so I'm about to be quiet and let Chief do the honors here. But, from a policy perspective, we talk about trying to police or set our policing services up at a ratio of 1 sworn per 1,000. And so if you really look at where we are today, we're already behind. You know, we're behind by about 5 to 6 officers based on that number. One of the challenges that we're going to have is that's growing the cost, you know, for that department at a very, very fast, very, very steep level. When you begin to contemplate what's happening on the other fluctuations and budgetary limits that we're going to have, you know, that's going to be a difficult cost to absorb that quickly. And if you think about us doing between 500 to 700 homes a year right now, you know, you're adding about 3 people per household. So 1,500 people, that's 1.5 officers per year over year. And so again, our tax base and our revenue streams aren't growing fast enough to cover that. So Chief and I began to talk, you know, as we were going through our POA negotiations earlier this year, say, okay, you know, that's the ideal policy provision. What is a functional plan? And, you know, how does that look? How would that kind of roll into our staffing needs? And then how do those costs then compare, you know, from one to the other? So these costs are adjusted to reflect the application of the current POA, the MOU that we have. So it already reflects that, and it grows off of that basis. And then, and I'll flip back to it for Chief, but you know, the other one then is the additional police activity and the additional police needs and community needs out here also require additional support staff. So we've got evidence clerks, we've got dispatch communication staff, we've got cadets, you know, we've got, you know, all sorts of other support that's needed as well. So those have to grow additionally. And again, we're behind by about 2 positions now. So with that, and again, then I've got a final slide, which begins to then roll sworn and support together. And so you can, so Chief, I want to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Am I speaking into it properly, Heather? Okay, good. And so, and I'll just start off with the mission of the Beaumont Police Department. And it's the mission of the Beaumont Police Department is to provide the highest quality public safety service in the most effective and efficient manner possible. So we're able to do a lot by our staff wearing multiple hats. It's how we survive, truthfully. And so we got to come to an agreement on a couple things. So the 1 per 1,000 is what I consider the 2,000 calorie diet. The federal government's going to pick a number so you can compare apples to apples, right? It's why you see our crime data is based on 100,000 population. Even though we're at 48, we still have to report it. But that's the target number. And so 1 per 1,000 is just a comparable number. But what you can't really do is compare Beaumont to other cities because each city is so unique. And I think the most glaring local example would be Palm Springs has a lower population, but they have over 100 sworn officers, and that's because they have an international airport, a downtown, a nightlife, completely different than Beaumont. And you wouldn't want to compare Beaumont to perhaps San Jacinto or other neighboring jurisdictions because our quality of life expectation has been set much higher by council and residents. They've come accustomed to a service that we uniquely provide. And so with that, when we talked about the staffing, what we really want to talk about are goals and what function does this council want the Beaumont Police Department to serve in this community. And so when I say public safety, it's because we have this very large umbrella of many services that my fellow chiefs in this county do not have. And so we have Office of Emergency Services, we have animal control, some will have that, some will not. We have community enhancement, most do not have that. The city does, but in our case, it's under the police department. And then we're unique in some of the other services, such as our search and rescue, not a certified search and rescue, but like I've told you, between Mila, our K-9, our UAV, which is a drone program, our off-road vehicles, we're instrumental in recovering our own people, so we don't wait on our regional partners who are happy to assist, but they cover the entire county, and so their response time can be monumental at times. And so we do very unique things. And when we look at patrol staffing, of course, we're going to look at response times. It's my goal is to keep our emergency response times to priority 1 calls under 4 minutes. Most often, almost every call for service involving emergency medical services, the police department's there before fire and EMS. It's inevitable because we can move. We're so much more agile because we're in a beat system. We're spread out geographically where your AMR is probably going to report from downtown so that they're central. And we know where our fire battalions are. They're in the houses typically. And so we're spread out. But at the same time, we're so spread out geographically because our density is we're one of the least dense cities, where if you look at Corona is the most dense city in the county per population per square mile. We're nearly the same size as Corona in square mileage, but our population's a quarter. But we're spread out to the extreme northeast and now the extreme southwest with Olivewood and Tournament Hills 2 and Fairway. And you look at Stetson, and there's no quick way there. We go very south to the Four Seasons. And now you look at the development of 4th Street and the logistics centers, the officers are spread out. And many, many calls are a 2-officer response. So we look at the response times, we're looking at the miles driven, our paved roadways, and one of our goals is if you were standing out front of your house and you just stood there and waited until a Beaumont police officer passed you, what is the percentage, or what's the chance that you would see a marked unit if you stood out front? And so we look at that, and it's, again, it depends, what happened, what call's going on that day, but we have an equation for that because we want a certain number of positive contacts, and then we want a certain number of not so positive contacts if you're a suspect or, you're up to no good, right? We consider them positive, bad guy doesn't. And so we look at that number, and we're about where we want to be. We're right now we're at 30,000. When I say right now, by the way, I mean till the end of August. So my stats come by 10 days after the conclusion of a month. So I won't have September until probably October 8, 9, 10th, somewhere in that area. So we're about almost 31,000 calls for service to August 30th. 17,306 are dispatched, and then there's 13,408 proactive contacts. That's your business checks. That's checking on AM, PM. Down there at First and Beaumont, that's a very vulnerable area because of its proximity to the 79 and then the 10 and the 60. That's your Starbucks, your schools, just checking in and seeing the kids. So you'll want a certain amount of police officers out there to keep your proactivity high. And so this proactivity is very, very good. You're looking at probably about 40% of proactive time, and that's about right. We talk about the philosophy of there's 3 things that need to happen for there to be a crime anywhere. You need a location, a victim, and a suspect. And the police officer's job is just to remove one of those 3 pieces. And how did they do that? Well, they made a proactive traffic stop. They recovered a gun and a mask in the trunk. Chances are you prevented a robbery. Or if they're at the USA Gas at midnight and the suspect was to drive by that wanted to rob it, he just removed the location. And so these are just philosophical ways that we staff. We look at call load capacity. And again, I just spoke about that. Some of the other considerations is, I strongly believe that for us to have a quality city, a quality community, you need three things. You need strong families, safe and sustainable neighborhoods, and resilient youth. And so you look at what the Met team does, it's probably one of our most under bragged about units. It's a multiple enforcement team. I assembled this team over time, and some of the things that they're tasked with is the at-risk youth, impacting gangs, narcotics, homeless. So 6th and Penn was a major eyesore. I think we can all agree it was cleaned up within a week. I'm not saying that it won't get bad again, but this is on their radar because we're trying to establish a quality of life for the residents here and our economic development, our business. One of the major concerns from Four Seasons and some of the areas was the homeless in front of Food for Less. So our cops team, which is comprised of motors, and it used to have the business liaison officer, which was Corporal Galbraith, if you remember Josh Galbraith, some of his very important functions. That's been unstaffed for some time. So instead of patrol continuously going to the same place and handling these quality of life issues, it took some time. It took a lot of pulling. It takes a lot of time to get the property managers from the LA, Orange County area out here. And finally, we've got them to the table, held them accountable, and we're going to make that, they are going to make that very uncomfortable for the homeless to just lay and then go and harass patrons of these stores. But it took over a year to really get their attention and to find the right person that was in charge, and making them understand that community policing is not the Beaumont Police Department doing everything for you. It's a two-way partnership. It's we got to meet you halfway. And so that's what that team does. What the motor officers do, and we look at the success of that. We look at fatal collisions. We have not had a fatal collision in 2 years. We look at, which is, when you think about the traffic density, now our population density is not great, but our traffic density is, in the sense that there's certain arteries that take you to the 10 and take you back home. And we've been very fortunate. There are non-injury collisions have been consistently dropping, and that comes from the motors and strong traffic enforcement and police presence. And then I'd look at the detective considerations. We've talked about this. So your patrol officer, when somebody picks up 911 and calls, that's the number one goal at that moment. They need a police officer, they need them now. We get there, and I talked about getting there in under 4 minutes. And the reason I say under 4 minutes is you want to start, if there's going to be a CPR or first aid, the officers can start that. They don't have defibs and those things, and we don't want to go down that path. But as you heard Monday night, we've saved multiple people's lives at the patrol level through basic first aid CPR. And so that's why we try to get there, restore that brain function, create the airway, and keep going. But your detectives, so the patrol officer takes the report. It's a little more complex than what their time permits, because the calls keep populating their screen. Then it goes to the detectives, and so we want cases cleared, right? And so our goal, and we've been pretty successful, is a 100% clearance on violent crime. And then the next category would be felonies. And some felonies are very difficult with burglaries. You need some leads, but we want that number to hover around 80%. We need 80% of our felony cases touched by a detective. Ideally 100, but you can't afford that, and most cities can't. And so, you just got to we have to keep our goals realistic. And then misdemeanors, we don't look at those too much at the detective level. And with Prop 4757, we investigate them when we get to them, but we don't look at them too strongly in the sense of, there just isn't time. There isn't time. And in the Met team, the great thing about the Met team, every team here circles back to handle a secondary function. And so right now you have detectives and Met covering patrol vacancies. We have a few vacancies in the organization. But you know, we're almost got some people on board, but so we circle back. And then the Met team circles back and takes care of detectives. And then they'll circle back and take care of the community policing efforts. And it's synergistic. Nobody in the organization has the mindset of, well, that's not my job. That's not in my job description. We cleverly put a tagline that says all other duties assigned, so they can't, but that's not their position. And so we look at those things, and then finally, and the city manager hit on this, you could have 50 cops, you could have 52. The number doesn't matter. The cases, the officers are generating police reports. There's forensic evidence now with our body-worn camera policy, digital cameras, recordings. Each case has to get packaged and sent to the district attorney's office before we even know if they're going to file it. And so you have to have your support people. You have to have somebody that's processing citations, processing evidence, processing the police reports, handling public records requests, not the ones that our city clerk handles, but on the insurance companies bombard us, obviously the traffic collision requests, and there's many things. And so we look at animal control and community enhancement, and right now they are ideally staffed for their current mandates. If their mandates change, we'll look at that, but they're ideally staffed. Our dispatch needs another person on the floor for those peak hours we've talked about. And then our records and property needs an additional support clerk. But again, as I mentioned, about 3 years ago, you used your discretionary funds and you rescued a part-time employee for me that was on the chopping block when the city was really hemorrhaging on the financials. And that has been critical. That part-time dispatcher has been critical in keeping dispatch afloat. She also handles all my training and my post-compliance. And then she's trained in property and evidence. I have one person for property and evidence that handles 43 sworn people's collection. And when in doubt, right, we just grab everything and book it. And so one person has to handle that. So, you know, as we look at staffing that records and that part, or that dispatch, then I can move the part-timer into property and evidence, and I really can save two with one, in a sense. And so the cadets are grant funded, so that doesn't cost you. Their backgrounds, their uniforms, everything is paid out of the grant. They have truly kept support afloat. But I'll just remind you that when we started the cadet program, support services was phase one. Phase two was to get them ready in the field, because the ultimate goal is to create this pond of future police officers, and we just pluck them and put them in the academy, and they become police officers that we have already known and invested in. So they are keeping it afloat, but they're not fulfilling their full potential until we can fully staff support services. And with that, I can answer any questions you have, I hope.
Thank you.
So the schedule would have us adding 2 sworn officers for next year, for that fiscal year 19-20, and then 1 support services staff member next year as well. And you can see how we would grow beyond that.
You know, Chief, you bring up the point of removing the location by having presence at key areas. You know, occasionally I notice the community enforcement, is that what you call those cars?
Med team?
What formerly was code enforcement?
No, the volunteers.
Yes, the citizen volunteers.
Citizen volunteers. Because when you see that at like Chevron or something like that, you don't know it's not a full police car until you get right up to it.
Right.
Is there a thought of increasing that awareness to save money on moving forward?
Right, right. And so we do have a very robust citizen volunteer program, and many of you have attended the appreciation dinner, and we talk about the hours and what that equates in savings. Remember a couple things. They cannot have suspect contact. They do not take criminal reports because they are volunteers, and to tie them up into a prelim or a trial when some of them do have full-time jobs, or they're not trained to testify on, they're witnesses, but that's not what they're trained to do. It's not what their true purpose is. Their true purposes are eyes and ears for the sworn. And so they're not supposed to piggyback patrol calls. But you are right. If you see a car, if you see a citizen volunteer car at this gas station, and even if the suspect knows, hey, that's a volunteer, that's a hassle they don't want. They're going to go somewhere else to what we call a soft target. They're going to go down the street, and hopefully they'll pass a police car, and they'll go, wow, that's just two. That was two within a minute. I'll go somewhere else, and that's what we want. But you can't use your volunteers to augment, and there is, and I couldn't source the code, but you are not permitted to, so you couldn't say, hey, I want 20 police officers and 40 reserve police officers. There is a legislation that prohibits you augmenting too much of a percentage one way or another. So you can't clean out your police force and go, well, you have just a reserve police force. Yeah, so it augments it, but it can never supplement or supplant it.
I have a question, Chief. When you do this projection of your resources, one of the things that is going to affect the years as we go forward here is that we've talked about doing another station location.
Right.
So how does that factor into your personnel if you have to start splitting them across different physical locations?
Right. So, and to just frame it, are we imagining let's say the main headquarters were down by Potrero, but we have to keep a certain amount of folks, patrol staffing up in this area as well, right? So what I've talked to with the city manager is, we have an opportunity currently. If the main headquarters were down in Potrero, I've talked to many people about this. I know for a fact there are many residents in this older block of town that will not ask for a ride, and they may not have the means, the driver's license, or the means of transportation themselves. They're not going to go to Potrero. The police department has to have a downtown presence. It's imperative, and at least something within a busing route. And so we have that in the sense of we have a great opportunity that's presenting itself with the Party Design Center. They're been vocal about wanting that to become some sort of a substation or presence with the police department. It's something that we'll continue down the path of, but that would work perfectly, and then we could free up City Hall and this campus for the city's growing staff and needs as well. But then we're really in a great location in the sense of we can get to Palmer and we can get to that side of town really quickly, and if we are down there 8th and Highland Springs with a staffed substation, we can get to Sundance North, Four Seasons, Code 3 really quickly. We'll really be able to get to, again, there's always going to be pockets like the future Sunny Cal, Stetson that are, I mean, you're going to have to go up Beaumont and then this, or you're going to have to pick your poison and go down Cherry Valley and come back. But that's just the way the city's designed, but we'll get there. Okay. We went to a 5-beat system, and what that means is we divide the city intelligently into 5 patrol beats. Our current MOU says that our minimum staffing is 3 officers, and we have enough folks, if they were all on board, to have 4 of those beats covered. But ideally, at some point, we're gonna want the 5 beats. And what that, it just geographically lets you get to your place, your area quicker. But yeah, so it won't change the number of staffing by having a main headquarters. It's just gonna spread some folks out, but with technology, the clerk that was at the main station can easily do their job out of, you know, what would be called the E substation. Yep.
Chief, do you have, you talk about support staff, is there a formula that's used when you get to a certain number of officers that generate a certain amount of work, or is it based on calls, or is it just functionality of the department?
Right, and so to give you a textbook example, I base a number of detectives off of a ratio. For example, for every 7 officers in patrol, 1 detective needs to be in there.
Okay.
So we've met that. Now, that doesn't mean at 22, we would go to a 4th detective. It means by the time we hit 27, 28, I would need another detective, right? And so when you look at dispatch, currently dispatch operates very similar to patrol as they operate in 4 shifts. So you have your 911s. The Beaumont Police Department does not have a phone tree, which I'm proud to say. I will resist and hold off as long as I can, meaning you call the police department, you speak to a human being. Secondly, there's nobody to transfer you to. I mean, you wouldn't push 1 for traffic because you're not going to go anywhere, right? You know, or something like that. And then we also answer, it is our goal to answer 911s within 3 rings. So by the 3rd ring, we're going to answer the phone. And you're going to get asked quickly at times, do you have an emergency? And if you don't immediately say yes, you're going to get put on hold like I do when I call. But that's okay, because I typically don't have an emergency. And so you have somebody on phones and 911s, and we talked about these numbers. For example, last year, we handled 80,000 phone calls, right? That's 1 person on phones. Now that can be, and it was split, you know, maybe 45,000 calls coming in and then another 35,000 calls going out. And those calls go to the warrant bank. These things have to happen quickly, right? So the officer's out with, for example, today, I heard on the radio, it just happened to hear, an officer was conducting routine patrol around Glenview Middle School, often forgot about, right, but not to us. And there's 4 people in the car. And the car, you know, may or may not have had license plates. So you got to get the VIN number. So as we're starting to collect names, that's happening on the radio side. The phone side has to be calling the warrant banks for Samuel County, Riverside County. If there's any juveniles, you have to call the probation department. That's 1 person doing that. And then 1 person handling radio. And so every traffic stop, every license plate ran, everything that anybody happens to do in this city shall be put on the radio by me. We track every single call for service. So if you stop at Starbucks and get a cup of coffee, you put out your location because you never know when something's going to happen. It's officer safety. It has to happen. And so we have 8.5 dispatchers. And so you figure 2 on each shift, that's minimum staffing. There always has to be 2. We tried to say, hey, after 2 a.m., data shows that the calls drop. So from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., you can work by yourself. And then, of course, after we tried that, what happens, a very critical incident that put the officers at higher risk because there was 1 dispatcher. And so I ended that quickly. We tried it. It didn't work. It was a cost savings measure. And it was also not even just cost savings. The unforgotten part is because there's there always has to be two. When somebody's on vacation or has a day off, it has to be covered with overtime. There is no fluff in the dispatch staffing. So that .5 dispatcher, she covers as much as she can, but she can only work at limited hours. And so she can work 2 shifts and then part of a shift, and then I have to send her home. And so, but you have 8 people that have vacations that always have to be filled, or whatever it is. Training, they have mandated, the state puts mandated training on all my staff, all of them. Except animal control, that bill was defeated, but we don't allow our folks to work on training. So it always has to be backfilled. And so the 9th would give you that coverage of a lead being on the floor, somebody with some exposure and some experience, but then also cover vacancies as well. And I apologize on who asked that question. Was it who?
It was just, I was asking the question if there was a formula for coverage.
Yes.
So basically, it sounds like it's based on,
That one's based on mandates
Okay.
more than a ratio.
and safety.
Safety and mandates, right?
Okay. Have we thought about using any type of electronic devices to read license plates so that you can save phone calls, or is that not?
We have license plate readers,
Okay.
or ALPRs, automatic license plate readers. We have a couple units assigned. But keep in mind, our volunteers do parking enforcement for us. In fact,
Okay.
we've cleaned up much of the gross handicap violations that were occurring. We get many complaints about on Second Street in many areas. You just don't see it as much anymore.
Okay.
That was a system that you all just recently approved, the turbo data system. And it's been great for patrol, volunteers, animal control, and community management. It's been fantastic. And the easier we make it, they will write the citations. And remember, citation is not about revenue. It's about responsible driving, responsible business ownership. It's to curb behavior, not to collect a revenue.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually was kind of one of my questions. First, I applaud you always looking for that extra place to get funds and grants, and thank you for that. That always helps the city out. My question was pretty much about equipment and asking about what can we get to help make the officer's life easier, or at least more, feasible. Any ideas out there that you have that you wanted to bring to council in the future that we need to consider in the budget, or?
And if I may just touch, and I'm glad you brought that up because I failed to, was currently 2 of our sworn positions are being funded by other agencies, which equates to just under 5% of sworn staffing. I mean, it's a pretty healthy number. So one position through relationship with the school district is our school resource officer. It's a 3-year assignment, 3-year position that you all approved along with their board that the school district pays for. The second is through the probation department, and that is for our AB 109 early release folks, the compliance team, to just make sure they're following their rules of release. I'm always looking for those revenue streams, but I'm also very cautious with them because there's a vulnerability in them as well. When you hire somebody, especially a lateral, and you're telling them, hey, you have a job with us. But I know in the back of my head that I have to be very careful in 2 more school years cycles because if we don't re-up with the school district, I'm going to leave a position vacant for a little bit until I have an agreement in place with the school district, because I won't bring in a lateral just to lay them off, because then we'll never attract quality people again when that word gets out. So you're a little bit vulnerable, but at the same time, how do you say no to free money? And so we look for that free money. And then secondly, we've been very successful in using SLESA monies for grants for equipment. As you recall, not only does the SLESA funds pay for the cadets, it paid for our UAV system. It's been very beneficial already. Paid for our body-worn camera platform, so we paid zero, the city paid zero out of pocket for that. And you may have been reading where certain unions, police employee unions, have fought their management on cameras. My union asked for them. They wanted them. I was ready to just go another year, and they said, we want the cameras. We're not doing anything wrong. So we have been paying for our tactical shields. 50% of our ballistic vests that the officers wear are reimbursed by the federal government, but we have to stipulate to a mandatory wear policy, which we do. So you saw me wearing mine Monday evening, even though I'm not required to. You know, my management team wants to lead by example, so we wear our vests. So we've done very well in getting them the equipment, the ballistic shields. And in fact, through asset forfeiture money, you all approved just about a year and a half ago the level 4 vests, or what we call the active shooter vests. We had a critical incident, of course, of all nights. I'll wrap up with this. Right after the award ceremony Monday night, a person burned a flag to a neighboring business and then laid down in the street with a rifle. And so our officers arrived, saw the rifle, could have been a rifle, a shotgun, they weren't sure. He failed to obey commands and at one point crawled underneath his house, and we're not gonna go get him. It wasn't an imminent threat to public. Our officers are pretty smart in this, but they had their active shooter vests on. And they wear their what's considered bulletproof vest and then this vest over it. I mean, it's heavy gear. But you all approved that. That was asset forfeiture funds, and so we'll continue. It all ended peacefully. Just, I don't want to leave anybody in suspense, but, I don't want a chapter 2 in a year from now to tell you. But we didn't go in and get them. It's like, go sleep it off. We long formed the case with the district attorney because there was no imminent threat. We're not going to force a suicide by cop situation. So we have been very proactive in that.
Chief, I'm glad you brought that up. I was at Del Taco, and everyone's been asking me what happened over there. That's where you're talking about, right?
It happened on...
At the Chevron, the new Chevron?
Yep, on 4th in the forum block. And the person, interesting enough, has been combative with Beaumont PD in the past. And then came back out and was daring us. But the officer restraint said, no, you're not really an imminent threat. They're not waving the gun. The house is really by itself on that street. We evacuated the business. We put units down the street to make sure he didn't walk over to Chevron and force the situation, and let him sleep it off.
That was for the helicopter too, right?
Yeah.
We had that.
Absolutely.
I thought they were coming after you, but fortunately not.
On my side is, let me go back on the protocols. And you said 31,000, we have that. I mean, is that, do we track that on a yearly basis, on a monthly basis? And that would be nice to have a report on your side. And then you said you have 5 bids on, you divided them. Can we track by that number on every section of of the town or district on
Yeah.
those calls?
Yeah, so I'm happy to report that it's back up.
Yeah.
Our Bear Analytics, you can go online to the police department website and you can see crime in real time in your neighborhood. The reason we're excited about that is because the rumor of, it used to be if something happened to if your house was burglarized, you had to tell people. Now you tell one person and they put it on social media and it looks like there was 5 burglaries when there was 1. And so it's, hey, you live in a safe city, see for yourself. We have nothing to hide. I post the crime stats monthly on the website. They're there for everybody to see. We live in a real world. I wish they were zeros, but they're not, because because we live in the real world, and so we have crime, but our violent crime is managed, and it's a really safe city. So here's the interesting thing, council member, is because we don't have such crime to create, what you would say like a flow chart, because it's sporadic. A lot of it's transit. So, as if you recall, we had rallied the troops and we were talking about mail theft, right? And now we're not, because it's a transitory crime. They've moved on to another area. It will come back. We've hardened some targets. We've put sturdier boxes in, or the post office has, but some of those crimes are transitory. But any crime you can see online, and you can see on the map of where you live, and then you could see it by just straight numbers. But the 31,000 calls for service is not 31,000 crimes. It's everything from my kid won't go to school, right? Because we are everything. We are everything nowadays. My kid won't go to school. My mom took her meds wrong, to my boyfriend's hiding in my closet and he's going to kill me, which you heard about that one Monday night, all right? So the 31,000, but some of them are positive, not too many. I've yet to have anybody call dispatch and say, hey, just so that you know, everything's great. I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it, and take a break on me. No, they call us at their worst, but we're hoping that day comes. We'll hang up our belts and we'll go do something else. But any crime data you want, sir, I can get you. Yeah, and the last thing is, and some of you heard me say this, the next officer approved, the full-time employee approved, is going to go back to the business liaison officer program. It's vital to our economic growth. It's vital to what Kyle does for the city. It's certainly vital to me and the police department's overall success, that we're talking directly to managers and business owners. But when staffing gets tight, I have no choice but to pull back in those areas, because 911s are number one. And then we kind of go from that model.
Actually, I think that Chopper was looking for the Broncos quarterback. He's MIA, so.
Kind of like a record.
For them.
We all set, Mr. Chief, you want to move on?
Gotcha. So just real quickly to recap, so on our council goals, y'all see any adjustments that you care to direct us to make at this point? I know you just read them recently. I don't know if there's any final additional tweaks you can think of.
So are you asking to tweak the goals? Is that what you're
Yes,
asking?
yes, yeah. Do you still think these are legit? Do you want us to modify, eliminate,
Okay,
add?
it's probably the real discussion time, right?
Yes.
Thank you, Chief.
Time for the heavy lifting, yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was looking at how we have the goals here and we have the goals here. So did you just kind of summarize this?
Those are, right, those were, the goals I have listed
Just
really
for the
reflected the discussion that y'all had with the budget. So they weren't intended to be a carbon copy of one to the other, but they do reflect very closely. And that's good, because our budget and our programming is anchored towards these.
Right.
So what would you like us to do with this?
I would just say,
This
if y'all have any
is fodder
initial,
for enhancing the discussion, or added thoughts on any one of these, or
I was just
Ready for
thinking,
is
budget
this, there's
discussions.
no, is this in a priority list, 1, 2, 3, 4, or are they just?
these aren't in any specific prioritized order. These were simply the goals that when we workshopped, that we kind of pulled out of council's kind of brainstorming efforts, and we did that, what, 2 budget sessions ago? And so just wanted to see if you had any value-added changes or adjustments at this stage. We'll come back and, you'll have plenty of opportunities to come back and review these again, if you will.
I think we did a great job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think quality of life is an unusual goal because I think it's actually woven into every one of these. It's nice to itemize it separately, but if any one of these degrades considerably, the other ones, public safety, economic development, it actually seeps into the quality of life goals. So that's just something I think of when I look at quality of life as a goal, that it's really shored up by every one of those.
On community services, that includes public transit as well, within that umbrella?
And then on develop public affairs, I like the way that sounds, develop public affairs, because it seems to bring more of a community involvement in. Would we put that under the community services or sustainable community? Or how would you categorize that? Or how would we categorize it, I guess? So I just like the way that sounds, because getting the community more involved. So I'm just looking at his develop public affairs. I like the way that sounds.
Okay.
And then I'm comparing it to our goals. I'm just trying to figure out where we're putting it. Because I think it needs to be in there. I just assuming it's understood. I just don't know where. So could we say that the community services includes developing public affairs? Is that kind of what we're going with? I just think it's important to get the community more involved as far as talking to them, getting them engaged more. And I'll mention that later because I saw that on your PowerPoint somewhere in there. But I like the goals. I think we need to adjust them. Well, you did it right. You did a good job.
I got an A+ on that.
I think we had help. Thank you.
Well, I have to change my opinion. Because I agree with Julio. I think we need a goal in there about building the community trust. And you mentioned what develop public affairs, but a lot of what we are struggling with, especially after the last few years, is bringing the community back on board. We've done that with the finance committee, the audit committee, the economic development committee, and all of the public awareness, reach out and social media approach and all of that. So when Julio asked, where do you put it, I think it's a whole new goal.
I agree, but is it a budgetary goal?
I'm talking about the city council.
Right, but those are budgetary.
Yeah,
Well,
I think it is.
I think it is because, like, in the second one, I wrote down my ideas, putting things like enhancing the website,
Right.
hitting more ways of the public being surveyed. That's all part of the budget to get them communicated, improving our IT so that they can get more,
Okay.
other than just the YouTube. maybe
And I think
different-
almost over 3.5 years ago, we significantly improved the way people were able to view or follow our council meetings.
Mhm.
Because before, if you remember, it was just audio.
Right.
And it was a few days afterwards. So, yeah, I think it should be its own separate goal.
I just wasn't clear on where that
Yeah.
budgetary, but I understand, I agree.
And the idea came to me when we were at the league, looking at some of the ideas they offer.
Okay.
On how we can improve and get it more interactive with the public.
Right.
So that's kind of where I was going with that also.
Okay, thank you.
Another example of that is IT's been working to develop a PEG channel, that's a public access channel. We've got some funding there to help get that, so we may be able to deploy that fairly soon as well. That's a major step forward.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I think if any of you've sat on a board at the county, their system, I think it provides a lot more efficiency, both for the viewer as well as council, because you have the ability to, the mayor doesn't have to go down the line and say, would you like to ask a question, would you like to ask a question? You just push a button that says, I'm ready to ask a question when you're ready.
Oh.
It tallies the vote. And then-
And the voting is done automatic, I mean, not automatically, but very quickly, so I think that we should budget for those types of things.
This free person need Velcro for your curtains as well.
Now you're stretching.
Well, I need more duct
No
tape
pun
here. I keep getting stuck to this counter, so I just wanna let you know. You owe me some trousers here.
Put that in the budget, Julio's trousers.
Well, I think, I agree
Is
that
that community and trust?
that we've, not only have we done a lot, but we need to continue doing a lot to improve our image as a city. Some of that's been the work we've done on transparency, making the information more accessible to the public. Some of it comes under branding. You know, we've done a lot of talk and a lot of organization and money spent on branding our image, looking at, you know, a new symbol for Beaumont, et cetera, being more visible in the community at large, outside of the city, which I think we've stressed doing when we pushed to go to the conferences that we just went to. And so we need to keep that prestige both internally within the residents as well as externally to enhance the city's image in a true credible, you know, way, not just putting a spin on it, but doing some real substantial things. So that may come under develop public affairs. I don't know where else it would go, actually. But we've already spent some money, a lot of effort to do it, and we're kind of continuing to take that forward. It's really not economic development, it's really sort of more comprehensive than that.
Does that sound like a seventh goal then?
It does. It sounds like goal. Sounds like you also had you lost credit, and I think you had a C+.
But we evolve with the needs of the
That's
city.
good. That's good.
You don't want to peak too early in the budgetary process.
Okay, that's a B-. You got to B-, isn't it?
I think it was extra credit, we should have a 4.5 GPA at this point. so.
You got a 4.8, for sure. Yeah. You definitely got into Harvard now. Okay.
Mayor, I do have a request to speak on this item. Just get ready to do public comment for item 1.
So we have public comment on
Yes.
this one?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I did not open it for public. My apologies, I didn't realize we did. Okay, I would like to open public comment at 7:34.
Dave Castaldo?
I was actually prepared to speak on a different subject, but I'll talk about the budget. In December of 2014, this council started a new beginning in this town in Beaumont, and we've done a really good job. I enjoy living in this town. I enjoy shopping in this town, but this town doesn't have everything that I want and always buy. I go to other towns. And most of the other cities that I purchase my goods at have a city tax. And I know that word TAX can translate into a 4-letter word, even though it has 3 letters. But every once in a while, we have to talk about that. If I went to Vegas and I put $20 on a bet and I was guaranteed $40 back, I would do that every time. I look at the amount of people that come into this town, purchase something, leave, but yet we provide services for. Look at the number of people that go through our drive-through restaurants. Look at the number of people that go to Home Depot and Best Buy. They don't all live in this town. This city is losing a lot of revenue. When the city gets back 1% of the sales tax revenue, and if you guys increase 0.25%, you're increasing 25% of your sales tax revenue. Now, I know it sounds bad about increasing sales tax. because the senior citizens are on fixed income. There's poor people that would really look bad about. But if you think about it, the sales tax doesn't affect goods that they need to live on. It's not food that'll ever get taxed. It's the extra items. And if you really think about 1/4%, the people that are on fixed incomes that it may hurt, if they spend $500 a month of goods that are sales taxable, it translates into $1.25. If they spent $1,000 a month on taxable items, it comes out to $2.50. Now, by putting that 1/4% sales tax on, that $2.50 can translate into $5 or $7.50 to the city. Now, I don't like taxes. I don't want to pay taxes just like everybody else. But once again, if I was guaranteed that I put $20 on a betting line and got $40 back for my return, I would do that every time. Now, the problem is with tax, everybody thinks it goes to something and it never comes back. But be creative. Put that tax on to public safety. You guys are having a hard time with the budget, or put it on the senior center. Give the money back to the people of this community. Let them enjoy those reaps of the people coming to the city. You are supplying police services over at Walmart, Best Buy, and Home Depot, and there's people that we are supplying services to that don't live in this town. It's about time that the city reaps it, and you may want to consider it. I like this town. I plan on staying here. Let's make it better, and you guys are doing a great job. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
No other speakers.
All right. I will close public comment on that at 7:38. Okay, so you did add item 7, correct,
Yes, ma'am.
on the goals? Do we have anything else that needs to be added to it, or?
Again. Good?
You what?
We did a good job again, yes.
Yes, that was a good job. Okay, so where would you like to take us next in this discussion,
So,
Mr. Parton?
so you heard, and really, the police department service levels are really a critical issue for us, and we're definitely to a point of we've really got to look hard at expanding our force just to keep up. And so definitely, I just want to make sure that's a priority for you guys and that you think we're headed down the right path. I'm recommending that we really work with Chief and look at that functional approach versus the policy approach. I just don't think we can quite get there, although we'll try to get as far along that path as we can. Make sure you're okay with that.
Functional approach makes a lot more sense to me than the 1 per thousand. And I do like the goals or the targets that the chief was referencing. I'd like to see that back somehow, where we have your response times are going to be X, follow up on whatever it is, felony or misdemeanors is going to be X, just so that we've got something to look at and to base that on, if that works for you. But what your goals are, what your targets are overall, and whether it's in records or dispatch or whatever that is, I'd like to see that if council's good with that. But definitely a better approach than the 1 per thousand for me.
I think to get past the 1 per thousand, you've brought up, Chief, and you've mentioned this a number of times, that it is almost just a metric to compare cities to cities, but you can't compare cities. You brought that all up.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think we need to come up with other metrics, and I think the one that you brought up about proactive versus reactive percentages, things like that we could start to. I mean, if you're already focused on that or those kinds of metrics, I'd like to hear more of those so that we could start changing the conversation from, You know, you go around here in town, everyone says, oh, it's gotta have 1 per 1,000. If you don't
Right.
have 1 per 1,000, you're failing.
Right.
And so I think if we want to take more of a proactive police force, which is what I think we all want, and it's the direction you've been leading us, that we need to come up with metrics that we can say, hey, we need, you know, we need more officers, not because we need 1 per 1,000, but we need more officers because our proactive versus reactive metric is too low.
Right.
Right, and we're gonna draw it out the best we can. We talk about federal and state mandates. In this town, we often talk about the intangibles. You know, the city manager brought this up, we're growing so fast. And geographically, I told you the challenges we face to get from, you know, this side of the city to that side quickly to either get to a person in aid or back an officer. And then you look at the intangibles, and you, I know you all hear about it, you know, the readathon, where the officers are in the schools, the adopt a cop, the shop with a cop, it's all these intangibles that they do. And a lot of time it's on their own, but it really is this proactive thought that you want to prevent crime before it occurs. The worst thing you can have, even worse than crime in any community, is the fear of crime. And that's what crippled Emmett. That's what brought Emmett to its knees, truly was the fear of crime. And I was sharing this story with the city manager. I was at the sports park the other night coaching, and a new resident had asked, how's Beaumont? How's the city? Is it safe? And what I told him was, there's not a single street in this town that's not owned by the community. Every street here is owned by the residents. It's not owned by the police department or the city or a gang or a criminal element. It's owned by the community, meaning there's not any path that you can't jog down at any time, day or night. And I hope you feel safe, because I would. And I told them, but if any area of the community gets taken from you, the police department will go take it back and then give it back to the community. Because it doesn't belong to us, it belongs to them. You know, we're the caretaker of all public safety in this community. And so there are some intangibles, but we can really extrapolate this, because where something isn't data-driven, it's value-driven. And we'll show you the value, and we'll paint it out. You know, the flip side is, because of the rapid growth and the expansion, I told you I have certain state mandates I have to meet. If the city manager and I can't keep the staffing right, then I have to, as the department head, start cutting. That doesn't mean layoffs, it just means those intangibles, they just won't be there. Because I told you the 911s have to be answered. They're first. Everything else is secondary. And so we'll work something out, and we'll keep tweaking it and work with you all on it. Now, happy to meet with anybody that wants to maybe recommend somebody, or maybe a council member that wants to be the leader on this project that I could work with and kind of formulate. I don't know if that's something you have some thoughts on, but you can draw out what your collective thoughts are on that.
Well, as I said, I think if we get people, even people considering moving here,
Yeah.
to focus on not the 1 per 1,000, but on, a more of a proactive image and yeah, I mean, we know it's there. It's just that it's not part of our branding, and I know we're going through the branding right now. So, but I know a lot of people, when they first move here, they hear, oh, 1 cop per 1,000, it's a great place to live because of that number. And then when we're trying to make the point that, no, that's not the metric we should be following. So that's just why I brought that up.
Just keep in mind, it's not that the number's wrong. It's like the 2,000 calorie diet. You pick a number, and it doesn't mean that a 2,000 calorie diet's bad, or it just, most of us don't follow it. It don't fit everybody.
Right.
But if you took in 2,000 calories, doesn't mean it's bad, right, per se, depending on your lifestyle. And so for us, it's not that 1 per 1,000 is wrong, it's just, it doesn't tell the story of what the police department's doing in this community. That's why I don't like it. Like, why do you have the size of the force you have? Well, it's 1 per 1,000. No, that's not why we exist,
Right.
to meet some metric. That's not why we exist.
We can start focusing on call time and saying, well, we look
Yeah.
at call time rather than
Right.
1 per 1,000, and we focus on getting there faster.
Well, and you
know,
want a
that-
certain number of business checks, you want a certain level of proactivity, you want a certain level of community policing, right?
Those are the metrics, I think, Chief, that I'd rather see, that you provide us. You tell us what you think. That way we have a base to work from, because you know that better than I do. The other thing I think I would like you to consider is, do we need to set aside funding or begin planning for funding of the substation? Because, I mean, if you're cutting that time down, and that helps meet that metric, right? So, those are just my thoughts.
No, I think the substation planning is critical too. And I appreciate when you try to figure out what is the safety metrics that you use for the city too. The trend that we live in now of making sure that we have enough to be a resource for the school system, if in fact anything above the ordinary is needed there. So that may not be a day-to-day business at the police department, but we all know that the risks some towns have experienced with incidents. And you and I talked about that when we talked about some of the sports events. So, you know, making sure when you figure out your metrics, not only the day-to-day safety, but the event safety and the school safety also.
Absolutely, it's our greatest daytime population in the city, is our school district.
And then there are some follow-on issues to that also, such as graffiti abatement, things like that, that if we're gonna try to keep the criminal environment and criminal activity to a minimum, we've got to stay on top of those issues as well. So that's another kind of side service level issue we've got to really kind of think about that affects streets and community services and, all those other departments as well. But it's got to be done.
Your goal, to piggyback that is, your goal is to knock down graffiti within 24 hours. What you don't want is a moniker and then a cross out and then a new moniker and a cross out, because that's building into what's going to be a felony assault. It's going to happen if you don't. So when they put a, little Joey's corner or whatever, you want that covered before Bobby sees it and he's like, no, this is Bobby's corner.
Right.
Right, because Joey or Bobby's gonna get stabbed or beat up sooner or later if you don't catch it, and so you gotta take that down quickly.
Valid point. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Are there other kind of initiatives or service levels that you want us to look at? We're looking at streets. We've got our Measure A, we've got our gas tax dollars coming in, and so we're looking at that. We're programming that into our CIPs and getting more refined as we go. One major initiative we talked about was community enhancement. So we've added staffing levels to the community enhancement. That didn't happen until later in the year, so we finally transitioned to those services. So we're just kind of getting ramped up there. So we're moving that direction. I don't know if there's things like that. Are there some additional things that you hear about or that you've driven that you see that you want us to begin looking at a programming side? Just kind of a little bit of brainstorming on that.
Well, we talked a little bit about addressing our parks and our field availability for the different community groups. I think that would be something, be part of a good discussion. I think you're speaking tomorrow, I believe, at PASS EDA or something such as that. Is that correct?
That was this morning.
Oh, that was this morning. How was that?
We got a few zingers in, correct, Mayor?
Yeah, he was the best.
A plus?
I know.
C plus.
And we're at a D minus, but
Yeah,
you
no,
can't
it,
be good at the beginning.
we showed well in terms of the message that we had. It also was good because the past EDA, the opening spirit of it and the closing spirit of it was very much what we have talked about, which is the regional approach at getting together and improving the region versus the silos of each community. I'm not sure everybody embraced that message today, but if they hear it again and again, I think that they will embrace it more. And I will say on the one point, it was the amount of new businesses that are anticipated to come to the community. It was, we had an extraordinarily high number compared to many of the other communities, which means that our reclaiming the city and our economic development was really, I mean, as in times 10 in some instances, what the other cities. So that shows a significant earmark of how much better the metrics are.
It's really kind of amazing when you look at the numbers. So since 2015 to today, you've added 400 primary jobs. And so that's really a good number. But you've got 1,300 jobs committed coming with new prospects you're opening. That's just, then you got more activity coming. So jobs, primary jobs is critical, you know, to the sustainability, obviously.
Well, the reason I brought that up was because about a year and a half ago, you and I met with the Coachella Employment Development, Economic Development Foundation or Association. And we talked then about working with them to enhance some of our small business instructions. I think we've talked about a little bit on Economic Development Committee, at least when I was on there. And I think if we could look at possibly budgeting programs such as that, and the reason I brought up the past EDA is because I think it would be a good platform to partner with and bring in, you know, something such as, not necessarily Coachella, but something like that, and then look at the ideas of what we talked to with them about finding a way to incubate businesses and to build a economic development center. So I know this is sort of pie in the sky thinking, but if we're budgeting for long term, I wanted to see if you could bring that to the discussion for next budget workshop.
And it probably would surprise you to find out that there's been at least 4 other council members that have kind of mentioned that very same.
Does not surprise me at all.
So, because
we're all of the same mind, aren't we?
Yeah, it's A+ material out there, right? So, absolutely.
And it also brings in the idea of the partnership of, you know, possible this internet and Wi-Fi and stuff that we can talk about when we talk about partnershiping.
Well, that's another thing. If you could look at that conversation we had regarding the public utility and bringing that along incrementally. But again, I think to really have that discussion, the rest of the council needs to be brought up to speed on the discussion that we had with Mr. Christensen. I think would be a big advantage.
Yeah, that's the idea of trying to look at basically a public infrastructure approach to fiber. And looking at a grid, kind of a localized grid.
Yeah, if you get a chance, Google Entry Point and watch a couple of the owners or TED Talks, and he talks about how with this program we can significantly reduce the cost to each individual organization or home that is on a public utility version of broadband. And it provides quick choice. It's a huge investment, though, because you can't just use the pipes that are in place. You have to incrementally build out your own infrastructure. But I think it would be, if we did want to do something like that, it would be a many-year investment. It's not something, and you have to, as we talked, you have to find someone like maybe the school district or a HOA that wants to be the early adopters.
And there's different ways too. I've looked at different partnerships too. That was one way. I think probably the most feasible was long term. But you know, we had talked about. Didn't you talk about in the beginning? Weren't you talking to Spectrum or Verizon?
Yeah,
Hotspot
about doing
types of-
something such as that.
Yeah.
But when I listened to this presentation and saw what they were doing, it seemed more sustainable. It put us less at the whim of whatever service provider, because you basically,
Yeah, you're buying their service.
yeah, you make the service providers compete almost on a real-time basis with your customers. Whereas now, if you want to switch from one service provider to another, I mean, it's a huge challenge, and you have to make commitments to get the right pricing. So again, I can't do it justice the way it was presented, but like I said, it's about a 20-minute TED Talk that really lays it out pretty well. Get a chance to look at that.
Todd, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, on the note of private partnership and city and municipal city partnerships with different businesses, it brought to my attention at the League of Conference the private partnership, municipal partnerships for parks, for regional parks and so forth. I was talking to some guy about Sportsplex and so forth, and he was talking about how the city can try to get involved with that partnershiping with different entities. But I bring that up because the proposition passed from the Parks Bond is coming up for money availability for cities to put in for applications for park improvement. So I think it'd be also prudent to start thinking about those priorities there, to see if we can get towns involved with seeing what's available and seeing what we might be able to meet and what we might be able to apply for, as that's coming available soon.
So do you want this level of detail that you put underneath each one of these goals, where you talk about things like fiber and private partnerships for, regional parks, or, I mean, is that too much detail for these 7 goals? Is that what we should?
Well, I wasn't
be doing?
suggesting putting them under the goals.
Exactly.
I was just a conversation.
I'm asking, I don't really know how he wants the input.
I think he wants direction from us on what to do, and I'm just suggesting that's not part of this.
I can ask him. So how do you want the input to be the most effective? Do you want us to continue to run through what it is some of our ideas are, and you aggregate it like you did before?
Yes.
So for instance, when we talk about the post office, or, potentially a rail stop, or any of these things, you want us to talk about them tonight, and then you put them underneath where you feel it fits within the goal?
Yes, because I think, really it's the spirit of brainstorming. And so just want to try to get all your ideas out. And then we can go back and I can begin to structure some of those issues and kind of come back to you with maybe some scheduling on how to begin to tackle some of those things. But everything that you're talking about is fitting within the vein, of all these efforts in terms of quality of life, economic development, enhancement. So.
Okay, so, post office, rail stop, all the other things that are mentioned, is there more? And I will apologize to the council member if he felt offended when he comes back in. But I was really asking you, so I wanted you to respond. So I'll make sure I do an apology for that.
The other thing that I would like to look at is our maintenance. I have folks asking about that, with funding or budgeting for that, or whether it's, we look at working with other agencies in that regard as well.
So what kind of maintenance are they referring to?
Just like the maintenance of medians, landscaping around the city.
Can I follow up on that?
Sure.
On the maintenance on that, on the landscaping, especially on the median side, and also the side of the the road. As I mentioned, I mean the pine trees, pines, needles in there is being shoved on every side of the street, and it's piling up. I mean, we don't want any liability. The kids walk in there and run in there, sleep, and it's a fire hazard at the same time. Now, on what he's mentioning, I mean, I really like that if we look on probably for now, do a contract, outside contract to do the maintenance. If our maintenance community services cannot handle it for now because there's a lot of transitions, that would be nice to do outside service on that. And again, I don't know the budget on that side. I mean, it's so minimal, but especially on other side, the weeds is 5-footer already and everything. It's shameful. I mean, seeing people in there and then say, hey Ray, what's going on in the weeds? I mean, I haven't seen this tall, So, and then also on the freeway side, on the 10 freeway, on the desert lawn, I mean, last time we got that Bob Sherwood is still around, but now it's all grown up. I mean, it's covering the side of the road. Thank you.
Councilmember, my apology if I seem like I cut you off. I just hadn't finished expressing my thought, that was all. So my apologies if it seemed like I cut you off.
On piggybacking with Mr. Lara's idea, I was also thinking was about if there was any way to think about some sort of a co-op partnership that we might be able to go with the small businesses. I've had a lot of concern from businesses about their vandalism on their wall and their property, and it's difficult for them to cover it up and to paint and stuff. So is there any way we might be able to think about getting some sort of a co-op where we might be able to help the small business owner, not do it for them, but maybe meet them halfway or help them enhance the aesthetics of their business in certain areas. So I'm not looking for a redo. I'm looking for things that have been tagged that they're trying to, because when they do it, sometimes they do it the least expensive as possible because it's in their profit. So they might do it with a different color. They might do it with something that's not quite aesthetic for the city. And I was just wondering perhaps if that's something maybe we'd be able to look into as part of the trying to get the city looking a little better.
I have a question. Did we ever get to the point in our zoning where we stopped the flow of murals? I'm not sure if we got there, those big wall painted murals. So we could get another one tomorrow, right?
Yeah, because I think John was talking about the freedom
Yeah,
of
I
expression.
think we ended up where we couldn't do anything.
Yeah, as long as it was not
Yeah, they
advertising,
couldn't do,
that kind of stuff.
yeah, they couldn't do commercial advertising, but yeah,
Yeah.
artwork on the building, those types of things are really things that they have expression ability.
And I'd still like you to buy the Beaumont sign.
Yes, I'll go for that. I'll second that.
And I'd still like you to come up with if you can come up with a price on it, potentially presenting it to council where we could supplement the cost by allowing advertising on there that we control, as well as, of course, the city messaging that we might want on it versus who's running for election in another town.
Any other things? Again, we'll have a chance to come back and touch on more as we kind of go.
Think of something on the way home.
Sure. Well, feel free to text 24/7, call, write,
25 eat.
come by the house. It's all right.
Barbecue on you?
Yes, sir, will be.
Brisket?
Brisket. Always have a hot brisket ready.
Well, this is, I don't want to move on to the next item until everybody's had their opportunity to just bring up whatever they want. If we're done with it, though, I will move on to item 2.
Okay. Okay, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Solid waste and related services.
A much more exciting topic.
Oh, yes.
I will try to go through the presentation fairly quickly for you, and then I think what we're looking for is just to make sure that you're informed with all the things that are coming up, as well as get a little bit of direction from the council on where they'd like to go with their waste hauler contract. We're about 2 years out, and so now's the time to start looking at negotiations or RFP, whichever the council chooses to go. And again, just to make sure that you're fully aware of some of the state mandates that we have coming forward, some that are already in place and some that are coming forward within our timeline. And so first, just wanted to walk you through some of the existing mandates that are out there. These are important because these are your mandates, and then that mandate is transferred through a local ordinance out to our businesses in multifamily. The first one is AB 341. This is commercial recycling. We are required to turn in our numbers to Cal Recycle. Any business that generates more than 4 cubic yards of waste, and that's per month, which is basically kind of one dumpster, they are required to do mandatory recycling. To date, we have about 40 non-compliant commercial businesses, which makes our compliance number just below passing grade. And so that is something that Cal Recycle has looked to us to make sure that, we are strong out there and implementing a recycling program and staying on top of our businesses. From the multifamily side, this is a little bit more difficult. Every organization, every city struggles with multifamily because of contamination issues. We have 22 non-compliant multifamily complexes, which puts our compliance number down at that 46% number. Those are both areas that we are looking to improve and have some ideas that I'll talk to you about in the recommendations section. Cal Recycle has mandated that we send a letter out. We've drafted a letter and sent it to them for approval prior to sending it out. I hesitated on sending this out because I wanted to offer some options to your commercial businesses. Right now, one of the things that we're struggling with on the recycling side is your fee structure only contemplates a 3-yard container. Well, not everybody needs a 3-yard container for recycling. And so I think one of our recommendations to you as we move forward is that we offer some multi-sizing for not only our multifamily, but also our commercial customers. My take is you first get them hooked and then they move up in recycling. But until you get them hooked, even with a smaller container, assuming that they generate less recycling, you will never get them to recycle by mandating a 3-yard container out there. And so I think that's, again, one of the challenges, but we have to send the letter out. And today that's your only fee that's associated with recycling. And so every business, all 40 of these businesses would be required to put basically a dumpster for recycling out there, regardless of how much volume they may do. Same thing with multifamily. And again, one of the problems that you run into with multifamily is typically you contaminate it because the residents are just taking and dumping waste. And so we need to look at some alternatives. And some of the things that I've done in previous cities have been, you do more of a monitored program within the office. And that's how you start, and you get those folks to, real recyclers will come and recycle everyone, and you put a smaller container in there. Again, I don't have an option from a fee-based side to give them a smaller container in there. So really the letter that's going out is you're requiring them to buy a 3-yard waste or a 3-yard recycle container, and it's at a fairly large cost to the businesses. So We are holding a workshop on December 6th. That's another mandate of Cal Recycle. That's a workshop that we will hold with all the commercial businesses. Hoping by then, if council gives us some direction to move forward with some varying options, that we have some of that to roll out to our commercial and multifamily customers. AB 1826 is the mandatory organic waste. This is for, what they did is they stair-stepped this bill. And so they started with, if you produce more than 4 cubic yards of organic waste, then you need to do a recycling. What's happening in 2019 is that is going to, if you produce 4 cubic yards of solid waste, which is basically commercial waste dumpster, you're required to do this. So in 2019, all of our businesses are going to be required to come compliant with organic recycling. And so we need to work through the specifics of those with our waste hauler, as well as something to kind of provide for in the future. This also includes multifamily, and so again, we're facing some huge challenges with how we get our compliance there. You'll see our compliance numbers are sitting in the 30% compliant and 0% compliant in multifamily. In 2020, the SB 1383 mandates we transfer this over to residential, and all of our residential customers will also be mandated to do organic recycling. So again, just another challenge that I want you guys to know is coming forward to your staff as well as your waste hauler. Again, we're sending out a letter and holding a workshop, so we'll be going over both of those.
These are unfunded mandates by Cal Recycle, correct?
That is correct. You'll fund them through your waste rate, so it gets, basically it in turn gets transferred over to your ratepayers.
Mayor, before we move on to the next page, I have a question.
Sure.
First of all, this is a workshop, correct?
Correct.
So is a workshop more a free flow discussion conversation with council and staff, or are we in a structured question and answer session?
I think the whole understanding the whole night has been, it's the workshop format where if you have a question or you want to make a comment, you just do.
Okay. So how does, who determines whether or not they're in compliance, and how do we move that compliance measurement to the residential household?
So that'll be a challenge that we're still trying to figure out in terms of the residential compliance. Haven't seen kind of a full program on that yet for organic recycling. In terms of your commercial, because they don't come through us for utility billing, basically Waste Management contracts with each one of the commercial businesses separately, so they're able to see, have they picked up recycling as part of their fee.
But the draft letter is a draft letter from the city to the commercial businesses?
That's correct.
So
yes.
We are going to be stating to them that they're not compliant and that there's resolutions that they have to go through, but we're going to be relying on the waste management company to tell us whether or not they're compliant.
That's
But
correct.
we're the face of you're not being compliant. Why wouldn't that letter come from the wastewater treatment plant? Or
From the waste hauler. Cal Recycle says the letter has to come through us, so the ordinance is through us and the mandate is from the state down to the local agency. And so, yes, they are contracting on behalf of us, and we are working in partnership with them, but the letter has to come from the local jurisdiction.
And what is the penalties or punishment side of this if they say, well, I am in compliant, or they say, you don't recognize the kind of business I have and therefore my compliance should be changed? Is there an appeal process?
There is. So with the letter comes a form. So if they are, let's say they're transferring their waste, or let's say they have a big lawn and they're not doing the organic recycling. There's a space on the form, and we can share that with the council, that allows them to put the specifics of that, report the tonnage that is going over, and then we report that as part of our report to the state. So yes, there are mechanisms that they can do to say either this doesn't apply to me, or or I'm doing it some other fashion. I'm paying somebody to take away my food recycle, and they're taking it to a farm somewhere. So
I just hate being the messenger and the receptor of their angst when we're not determining whether or not they're really in compliance. So.
Well, and we're working very closely with Waste Management. It's a partnership, but yes, I mean, we're relying on your contractor to go out and do that job because we don't really have the staff to do it. But we're looking at that and looking at the reports. We're actually doing the reporting with Waste Management back to the state.
Okay, thank you.
We make it clear in the letter, though, that this is all part of Cal Recycle, not the city of Beaumont.
We do. I actually changed up the letter and put the state mandate before the local ordinance first. Just because I thought, one, this is a state mandate, and it is something that we have to do. And yes, you passed a local ordinance to support this. However, it's a state mandate.
Right. So what's the time frame here for compliance once they get the letter?
We need them compliant sooner than later, and so we're working diligently. Waste Management is going out and visiting with all of them. Part of the letter states that we'll come out and do free site visits, audits to do this. Again, I think from the staff's perspective, when I looked at it, and it was when I first got here and kind of started to get involved, again, one of my biggest concerns is you were now telling a commercial business who may not do that much recycling, and we're not looking at tonnage, we're only looking at business compliance, that you have to go out and buy this large container to be compliant. And I think there are some other ways that we can get compliance and get our numbers up. It will require us to add some fees to our fee schedule. And that means with that, we'll have to go through a smaller Prop 218 process, but we'll need to do that in order to add it. All we have to do is send out notice to the affected customers. Certainly, it should be an easy story to tell. You can pay $90 a month, or we can pay $10 a month. I don't know what that number is. We haven't worked that out specifically, but I'm thinking we offer a 96-gallon cart, just like you have at your residence, or you have some stair step up from that.
But what we are headed towards is needing staffing either provided through Waste Management by contract or on site to now be able to manage and handle reporting back to Cal Recycle to make sure we're on top of all this, because it is us needing to ensure that our customer and our businesses are compliant.
Correct.
And we have to have proactive approaches for education, proactive approaches for outreach, and all those kinds of things.
Is CR&R one of the ones that are doing the organic waste right now for household? Because I know that they had
I'm not sure.
They had one of their biggest thing was their digester that they just built in order to be able to process the organic waste, and I was just wondering if you'd seen how they would.
I have not. I'm not sure that's something that we'll have to get involved with and understand the process. I think certainly as we go through any contract negotiations, we're going to have some provisions in the new contracts that allow for the state mandates as we move forward, because there'll be some costs associated with them. So just to go
on the residential waste, they're talking about, a lot of the communities talking about putting it into your green bin.
Right.
So
Yeah,
you
that's
dump
what we
your food
understand.
into your green waste, and that's where it's all supposed to go.
Yeah, I've seen the bottom of that. What's I gonna ask? I lost my train of thought.
So I just tell you a little bit about what your current contract has, and some of the services that are offered through your current contract. I think that's important as we move forward for you to know what we're doing today. So your current contract expires at the end of December 2020. So we're right within that time frame of really deciding what we need to do as we move forward, particularly as we have some of these state mandates that are coming down the pipeline as well. Today you offer residential, commercial, and industrial services. I didn't include the industrial as a note on here just because it is just what it is, industrial services. Residential is probably where you offer the bulk of your service. We do lots of different things outside of just general once-a-week trash pickup. So we offer bulk waste pickup. We offer e-waste pickup. We offer oil pickup. We do a sharps container program. One of the things that we've asked for is the usage on these programs. And what I've found is they're very, very low. And so you're paying for programs, or your ratepayers are paying for programs that either they don't know exist, or they're just choosing not to take part in. And one of our recommendations as we would move forward is to really look at the services that are out there, look at the usage. Again, you're spreading that cost across the ratepayer, but if it's not going to be used, then you can do a fee-based service for that, for the ones that do use it, and then other folks who choose not to. Or you may have some services in here that there are other ways that they can do it. You pay the CRV on just about everything now. So since I'm new to the community and new to the state, we paid it on TVs that were bought. We paid it on mattresses that are bought. And so these are predisposal fees that we're wrapping into a bulk waste pickup that maybe we should look at taking some of that stuff out because people are already prepaying it, and look at other alternatives. And so those are some of the ideas during the recommendations that I'll talk to you about. But just to know, we have very low usage on things outside of your weekly pickup. Commercial services, again, we work very closely with Waste Management. They try to do as much education as possible. They're doing a lot of site visits and outreach to try to get that compliance. And part of their audit is to make sure that, again, you don't have a customer that's overpaying, that doesn't have a 3-yard container that is only getting, half used every week and getting picked up every week. They can make some adjustments based on those types of things. They do partner with us on the community cleanup. I think any waste hauler would as we move forward. They have been very good at partnering with us in the last several months on community or on code enforcement efforts on our resident couches that are out there or mattresses that are dumped on the side of the road. We have been working with them, not just from a pickup standpoint, but really trying to identify, did somebody put that out on the right-of-way? Did I misspell something?
No.
Okay. Putting it out on the right-of-way that was scheduled for a pickup. So we've got some ideas surrounding that as well. They do provide us some dedicated waste management staff. I think we share some of that staff as the city manager recommended as we move forward. We think an in-house person to meet all of our compliance needs and efforts, to manage the contract, to do outreach and education would be something that we would recommend from the staff level. I'm dealing with a lot of this. Carrie's dealing with a lot of this. We really need somebody who's specializing in solid waste to do these efforts.
So, real quickly, so as a part of their contract, could we ask them to do more community outreach for the services that they offer? Or is that something that we're supposed to be doing?
No, we can, and we can certainly leave that with the waste hauler. I've worked it both ways, and in different cities. This city, we've left it with the waste hauler. My last city, it was with the waste hauler. The city previous where Todd and I worked, we actually had an in-house staff. I think we got better service that way. That particular individual was able to do the higher level complaints and issues to deal with. They did the higher level outreach programs. They helped manage the contract. I would recommend at some point in time we go to more of a community recycling site. They helped with that. And so I think they're just opportunities you get from in-house management that we can wrap into the contract, as opposed to someone that we're having to reach out to do it. It may take a day or two to come back.
The only reason I ask is because we're paying for these, and as I'm on council, I know 2 out of these 5. I didn't know the others exist.
Right.
And if I don't know, I can guarantee that nobody knows.
Yes.
You know, so if we can start utilizing it because we're paying for it, they're not gonna come up and do it because they're, you know, so, it'd be to our advantage to come out and, you know, a lot of these bulky items, we might pull back on the mattress on the road
Yes.
and so forth.
Yes.
Most people that I talk to don't know about the
The bulk is a big
bulk
one.
pickup
Yeah, it's a big
curbside.
one.
And when somebody told me about it, I used it, but you can only use it twice a year, right?
You can use it twice a year. So I've seen it done different ways in different communities. It's all based on what you negotiate into your contract. One of the things that we went to in our last city is we did voucher programs. And, you know, if you're like me, I got to get rid of it immediately. My husband has no patience for me, but I want it out of my garage. I don't want to be waiting until somebody might come pick it up, or I have to make that phone call. And so I think a lot of people are just taking to the landfill. We're very, very close to it, and maybe paying the disposal fee, partially because they don't know this, partially because they're impatient like me. We also did, and that brings up a code enforcement issue. So somebody puts it out, we see it on the side of the road, it may not get picked up in what we consider a reasonable amount of days, but you're paying a lot for those individual pickups, would be my guess. And so you could go to more of a community-wide bulk pickup where you quadrant off the city. Maybe you do it, you know, maybe it's more than 4 areas, and those 4 areas you put out for X number of times, and that's the only time you have bulk waste pickup on your curb. And then maybe you give them 1 voucher that they can go to the landfill and dump. So I think there are some alternatives that we can look at that will get, I mean, you really want to get that number of usage up, not only from a financial perspective, but it keeps stuff off of your streets and it enhances the beautification of your community. So lots of reasons to look at some different options. Certainly right now what we're seeing is people are not using it. Just some recommendations from staff. So additional options for meeting our state mandates. Again, I would recommend that council direct staff to look at some varying sizes for containers. I know it's not necessarily a process we want to go through so close to the contract, but I think for your commercial businesses, this is a win-win. I think that we look at adding a person through some sort of contract negotiations, and that would be an in-house person to help us with our state mandates as they come down the pipeline. The food waste is going to be probably the most challenging, figuring out how and what Cal Recycle is going to want to see. Modification of your services based on usage. Again, where we're seeing low usage, look for alternatives. Whether it's better education, if that's what you would like to see. If you'd like to keep the bulk waste pickup the way it is, then we definitely need to increase the education on that. If you'd like to look at some alternatives that we believe are in other cities have worked very well, I would recommend things like that. There are some that you may just want to cut altogether. The items that are being prepaid for disposal, why are we paying for them twice in our rates? I think those are savings to your customers that we can look at and negotiate in a new contract. You know, I think, you know, from staff standpoint, we would recommend that you try to hold the rates as much as possible moving forward. I think that, again, as you move services around, that's a very doable thing. Make sure that we're market competitive with our neighboring communities so that we know that our residents are getting the best price and the best service. The next one is always a fun one. So whichever direction council chooses to go, staff is happy to go that direction. I want to, you know, just make sure that you're aware of what comes with a conversion change. If you do want to go out for RFP, not scared to do that. I just want you to know that as we move forward. I've done 2 conversions in my last 2 cities, which is probably more than most people do in their entire careers. Those conversions come with about 6 to 12 months worth of complaints to the council. You need to be really ready for that. So things like if you change your waste hauler, I put my garbage out at 7:30 in the morning. My garbage is picked up by 9. I roll my canister back in. Everything's good. That's the way it's been for 20 years. You change waste haulers, they change routes inevitably. Their garbage now goes out at 7:30, gets picked up at 5. Their waste container now stinks. They put it back in their garage. You have changed their life. And so there are 15,000 scenarios of those that will happen, and you will hear just for months. Again, something that we can definitely deal with, but they come with inherent issues. Schedules change, routes change. We miss streets in the beginning for the first 6 months. It's going to be inevitable as you're changing that over. The driver will miss a street as he's going through his pickup. It just happens. You have new drivers. You have different ways of picking up. And these are all things that if you're willing and able and ready to deal with, staff will do that as well. If you have levels of service and ideas with where you want the contract to go, our recommendation would be let us see if we can get there with your current hauler first. Nothing changes for your customers and your residents. You get the benefit of a negotiated contract. We move down the road. Todd and I found out in Kerrville, garbage is a very personal thing.
In that case, that was simply changing the collection process.
Right.
So going from hand pickup to automated, pickup. That in of itself was.
Because of the metal can and plastic can thing?
People have certain processes. We all have processes on how we handle our trash, right? And so.
It's really almost as personal as how you shower. You step in the shower and do everything in your order. The way you do your waste collection internally is seriously sounds weird, but it's almost that personal.
And I used to think that was a little weird until I began to realize I've got my own thing too. So it's like, and my own thing is my kids have to do it, So, but they definitely have their thing.
We heard stories about the way that, they didn't have an internal garbage can in their house and everything went outside, and we were changing and requiring them to have another trash bin, to this is how I take my trash out in the morning. These are the days I have to do it because this is what I'm used to and I've always done it for 20 years. Again, those are just things that will escalate to the council, and you need to be aware of that. That comes with the mandatory organics on top of that. And so you potentially changing your waste hauler, and then on top of that, adding new and different things. Just be ready. That's kind of the reason for that comment.
And I think as I look at this, our current, Waste Management right now knows who our commercial customers are. They've got certain relationships. As we've got these mandates coming down, they've already got some ways to try to address that. And so if we're switching everything and getting into some of those operational mandates that are going to come down the pipe, we're just compounding, I think some of that. So, and I'm concerned about our compliance issues because we're going to have some additional gaps potentially between the things we're doing to get compliance to Cal Recycle. So, those are some of the concerns that I have is, we've got other things kind of now involved in this process. It's not complicated, it's just the logistics of it are pretty
It'll be time consuming, and there'll just be things that come with it that your staff can't foresee under any circumstance. And we try to make your jobs as easy as possible. And so, again, if you would like to go out to RFP, I'm happy to put together an RFP for you with your service goals and objectives in mind. I'm also happy to try to go negotiate that with your existing waste hauler. And if we can't get there at the end of the day, then we RFP. So I think you have 2 options to consider. I think on either option, you're looking at a long-term contract. There is a lot of capital involved in waste hauling, and whether it's trucks, the disposal contracts that they have at the sites. And so know that for a better rate to capitalize across a contract is really important. So you're really not looking at a 5-year contract. You're probably looking at a 10 with some additional abilities to be able to extend that contract. That will get you the best rate. If that is not what you would like to do, just know there may be some factoring in that company is going to capitalize on equipment, because they're going to roll out. Those garbage trucks are very, very expensive, and they're going to roll those out to you.
So I have 3 questions. The first one was answered, typical contract length, so that gives me an idea. I think it's critical, though, that we look at that rate being as close as it can be where it's current. We're already asking them for a sewer increase, and to ask them on top of that for trash increase is not going to be good. My third thing is, what about the street cleaning? We had talked about the street cleaning being a part of the contract.
We believe we could roll that into the contract and get you some value added to the contract as well, so you're not paying somebody else. It also, again, if we roll that person in, it allows some additional, oversight that we may not be getting today. One of the best things about that we can do is we're doing enhancement in beauty and things like that around, you guys talked about medians, is to make sure that when we're doing maintenance, we run right behind it with street sweeping. And that always works really well in a community. But yes, we've looked at that as well as something that we can roll in to try to get some better pricing on.
And our current contractor has that done, offers those services?
They do, yes.
Okay, good enough.
In the last one is, again, our recommendation would be, if you can tell us on the next slide what your goals and objectives are, is to let us try to go back and negotiate with Waste Management through the spring. If we can't get there by spring with something that is agreeable to the council, then my suggestion would be we go out to RFP at that point. Again, I think, just so you know, because I didn't put this on the slide, one of the provisions you're going to see in any contract that we do, whether it's a new waste hauler or your existing waste hauler, is there's going to need to be a provision for the price increase based on the organics.
Yes.
There's going to be some additional equipment that's going, and it's really unknown and unforeseen, even though that's a mandate of 2020. No one really understands what it's going to cost yet. Just know we're going to have to write a provision into any contract you do that allows for that cost to be passed on to your ratepayers at some level. And I think that's a fairly normal clause that you're going to see in most contracts. At least the last 2 that I've done, I've seen them in there. So the next slide is just to get some directions from you. Are there some level of services that you're not getting today that you would like to see? Are there some areas that you would like us to focus on? I think we've heard from Mayor Pro Tem Martinez that we'd like the rates to stay as constant as possible, as long as possible would be, I would guess, what you would have indicated. And then if we can get some direction to go out and either I need to start putting an RFP together, or I'd like to start negotiating something so you can see it, because we're within a pretty critical time frame.
I like to see the Mayor, I like to see to negotiate the weight pay in there, and then I also like to see the incremental increase in there if there's any. I mean, is the contract 5 years increment or 5 years,
Yeah.
5 to 10 years?
We'll set the rate every 5 years.
Okay.
You'll go through a Prop 218 process
Okay.
with the rates, and then every 5 years we'll have to go through the new one.
So we have an option on that. Sorry.
Yeah, and generally what you'll see is a CPI index increase that is built in, and then we'll go through the rate setting process again every 5 years.
Every 5 years.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then there's a max in there up to 10 years or what?
Generally, your first contract will be about 10 years. That's where you're going to get the best pricing. And then you may do 2 5-year potential renewals, or at the end of 10 years, if you're not satisfied and you really want to relook at it, you can renegotiate again. I mean, those are, but I think your initial term, I would recommend nothing less than 10 years to capitalize on best rates for your
I
customers.
agree on that. That's good.
So, can I go back to our non-compliant issues? We get the numbers from Waste Management? They provide those to us?
Yes.
Do they let us know that we're out of compliance, and do they say you guys need to do something to fix that?
So in
Or they just let us-
conversations, in conversations with Waste Management, their take is based on what they see kind of with all of their customers. Our compliance numbers aren't that bad. Cal Recycle is the one who sent us the letter and said, yeah, not as good as we'd like to see.
So where do they get the information from, though?
It's a report that we have to submit.
So we put the report together?
We do. And previously, it's been Nicole has submitted the yearly report, and then we have to, and we promised Nicole she didn't have to do this any longer because
I'm holding
really,
them to it.
Wow.
Nicole was really excited. That was one of those other duties as assigned. But
She normally says, no, I've got it this one. She's like, okay.
she's like, waste what?
I just was wondering or concerned that Waste Management wasn't more proactive in assisting us to maintain compliance.
No, they've actually been very proactive. They go out, and I've got a report that we just submitted to Cal Recycle that we can forward on to the council. It basically explains all the steps they've done in the last quarter to try to meet and increase these percentage of compliance numbers.
Okay. And then, one of the concerns I have that you brought up is that you will go back, if we want to go out to RFP, you need to start the RFP now, right? But you also said that if we negotiate or go back and negotiate and then we don't end up where we want to be, then we have to go out to RFP. So my concern is that if we try to negotiate and it doesn't work out, then we're stuck. It's too late to do an RFP.
I don't think so. So, I mean, it'll be a tighter time frame for
Okay.
sure. But it's still about, I'm still projecting we're about 18 months out from, final contract time. So my last conversion, they did an RFP right before I got to the city. I got the rollout portion, which is really the non-fun part.
Right.
But we spent about 6 months getting ready. You're going to RFP for a couple of months. You're going to go through some contract negotiations for a couple of months. We're going to get it in front of the city council. And then we're going to spend that last 6 months leading up to the end of 2020 really preparing for that rollout and that change. And that's assuming you would have a waste hauler change. But I think that you need to assume that you would because you have a couple of major providers in this area. And it's always better to assume you would than assume that you won't.
Christine, when you do the residential or commercial services, when you did the list, where does hazardous waste fall? Like paint cans and things like that? Is that underneath this at all? or is
It's
that-
under the community cleanup.
Okay, all right. Okay, good. In terms of types of service or levels of service, I don't know. I'd hate to see that curbside pickup go away. I just wish more people knew about it.
Right.
And also put things out at the right time schedule so that they weren't sitting there for a whole week before they get picked up.
Are you guys, again, here, as we talk about ways to hold your rate, are you willing to look at some options for that? Because I think what they're looking at is we can make X number of trips a day to pick up 1, 2, and 3. It's certainly different than your truck. I mean, you're sending a different crew out to do bulk waste pickup. If we look at doing it, if you want to do it twice a year where we do pickup, it's not a on-call per se. It's, maybe it's by area of the city. Maybe we do one of those, maybe we do one on-call. But I think we can play with rates that way.
Well, just a quick comment on that. I think that we should always leave one option to the resident. That's why I brought up the yard sale thing. I think we should always have one for the convenience of them. And then the second one, if we have a second one, could be a bulk one or coordination or whatever that is. But, you know, it's kind of, I almost feel that if we went out and advertised it now, you would see an increase in usage.
Sure.
But you wouldn't want to do that and then negotiate taking it out and then say, hey, it was great for the year and now we don't have it anymore. So,
Sure.
so I think something, I agree with Mayor, I think it needs to be there in some form, but.
And maybe
I
one
think-
of the things we do, we didn't, the city, Todd and I, we provided you the rates based on options and let you guys look at that. And maybe there's no change, maybe there is, but then you guys can kind of pick from the menu and we can bring that back. So it's the way it is now, maybe it's a different option, maybe it's a voucher system, so they have the ability to drop off at the landfill.
Or even, it wouldn't even be horrible, I don't think, if somebody paid extra to have it picked up at the end of their driveway.
And we could offer that as an alternative
That might be
service
an
as well.
option. But I think that if you put it on too much of a schedule, people are gonna be like you, they're gonna want it gone. And we have problems with people dumping things on Brookside or whatever because they don't wanna bother to go to the dump and, or the transfer station or whatever you call it. So I don't wanna end up not allowing that as some sort of an option, and then we see more stuff dumped in the city,
Sure.
and we're in a 10-year contract where now what do we do? Because now we've got a problem that we didn't plan for.
Well, let us play with that and we'll bring you guys back some options that kind of give you the gamut of things to pick from.
Can I share something in here? On the bulk, pickup, and I use them a lot. I mean, what they have a program that when you call them within 24 hours, they will pick it up for $15. And whatever size you have mattress in there, even the appliances, they will pick it up within 24 hours for $15. So it's a matter of, I think, information to the public that this service is available. And I know I used them only last week to pick up some of the bulk rate. Just be sure it's right there on the curb.
Right.
And they're so consistent, and they are there to pick up the bulk items.
But
So
you paid
probably
extra for that?
$15.
So you used your 2 and then you used extra? Is that what you do? Because you're using waste management, right?
Oh yeah,
So
you just bring it out your trash can
You
in
used your
there.
free 2 ones first?
I could call them anytime. Within 24 hours, they will come in and pick it up.
But
For
you already used your
$15.
free one.
Yes, I use the free one.
Okay.
And then if you have the mattress and other stuff, just put it on the curb, you call them, and they'll be there within 24 hours. That's my experience with them.
Is that price negotiated in that contract? So that fee they charge you
Yes.
was pre-negotiated?
Yes, what they will do is give you a list of fees and the extra pickups are a negotiated part as well.
Mayor, may I make a comment, please?
Sure.
Okay. I think we need to start by remembering why we're where we're at. We did not have a problem with the service that we were getting from Waste Management. We did not have anyone complaining about the rates. We're only at this point where we have to negotiate or consider whether to negotiate because we took the initiative and told Waste Management that we're giving you notice. That the contract we have, we're required to give at least, I think it was 2 years' notice or something like that. And so the idea that we would possibly come back with higher rates is unacceptable for me. I thought that the idea was that we'd give them notice and then that would force them to start talking to us. And if you remember when we did this when we didn't know how much money we had. We were facing bankruptcy. We looked at it as an option to turn a possible asset, a signing bonus, something like that to generate. Do you remember that discussion? It was about a generation of a signing bonus. The idea was to sort of encourage Waste Management to do what they could to save us even going to the negotiation process. So I personally would like to go to an RFP. I want to know, I agree with you in looking at types of services, alternatives, ways to adapt and fit into either what we have now. But the fact that we would renew a contract with Waste Management and increase rates for any reason, that makes us look like we really made a mistake 2 years ago when we said we're going to, or a year and a half ago when we're going to give notice. So if the rest of the council decides that they want to negotiate first, as is suggested, and then consider an RFP once we realize we can't negotiate with Waste Management into something that we were expecting when we started this process, then I would like to see some solid information on what our competitors are offering before we start negotiating a contract. I know you can't necessarily do that without an official RFP process, but we can review the contracts of Burtec in Calamasa and CRR. So I think the idea that we're talking about keeping the rates from going too high, that was not our purpose. I mean, in the end, we gave notice. Are we required to renegotiate the contract with Waste Management?
Not at all.
I mean, we could, but I think that would be the worst case, is that we say, well, we'll stay where we are. We don't go through a change conversion. We don't raise rates. But I think we got to remember that this was we decided on this because we thought it was a way to generate some much needed money, revenue. And we need to not lose the sight of that. And if we have to go through a change conversion process, but we have a big signing bonus to help with our reserves and fiscal responsibility, I'm willing to listen to the complaints.
So just one of the things that we've talked about is, because I know just a little bit of background because I was before my time, your waste hauler rates are a little bit similar to your wastewater rates. And so it has to be a reasonable franchise fee and reasonable admin fee. And so whether or not we can actually get a large signing bonus, I don't know that that is something that you'll be able to back up through a Prop 218 process.
But a large signing bonus that generates higher rates is not acceptable.
No, absolutely.
So, I mean,
and I think that where we've talked about with Waste Management to date is that we would expect a holding of the fee or a reduction of the fee as we move forward for your ratepayers. And then again, the unknown of the food waste is out there, and we're just going to have to be ready to deal with that when it comes down the pipeline. But I think that we can get, if you're looking for a reduction for your ratepayers, I think we can get to a negotiated point with that with Waste Management. I just don't know that if you want a large signing bonus, you're prepaying a franchise fee.
If that's the way the contract's written. My understanding was that we would bring them to the table with 2 years to work with them, and that early on my feeling from discussions with staff was they were not cooperative, they were not coming to the table, they were not working towards a solution. They were pushing back and indicating and putting out things. I mean, they talked to me about, well, you have to go through, they didn't call it change conversion, they called it other things. But like I said, I think for us to get up here and start talking about rates where, even in this public setting, to talk about, well, if we can keep the rates sort of low, if we give up some things and have to pay more, or if we want to keep things and have to pay more, we're sending them a message that we weren't serious about what we did a year and a half ago.
One thing I will say too, though, along those lines is we have different staff. We're dealing with different people with Waste Management than we were when I first got here. So you've got different staff that's come to the table with a different mentality to the conversation. So that's a little bit different, than what I had when I first got here. So you have that. So.
And I would say all of my dealings in the last, I've been here 9 months now, have been very positive with them. Probably as good as any contract negotiation that I've done in previous cities on waste. And again, you don't negotiate these very often, so the fact that I've actually negotiated a couple in my last 2 cities, lucky me, here I am again.
Well, understand what I'm trying to do here. I'm not trying to be the negotiator. What I'm trying to do is make you understand that I personally am gonna expect a lot.
Sure.
And that way you can go in with the idea to the waste management that, yeah, I'm the assistant city manager, I'm a nice person and we want to get this settled, but I got a council that's breathing down my neck.
Are you laughing at the fact he called me a nice person?
But I got a council breathing down my neck that expects a lot more than what you're giving me, and they're willing to go through the change conversion if that's necessary to get a better deal.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great message for me to be able to take back over, what we're talking about is, let's try with them so you don't have the headache of a conversion. But yes, with that, they already know. I've thrown out lots of things to them that they were like, oh, wow. It may not be large signing bonuses, but things that we can do to meet your state mandates, things that we can do to have the best customer service that we can have. Not that they're not giving that, but again, getting the usage numbers up or cutting that service to get to a better rate for ratepayers.
But not to beat a dead horse, I personally told citizens when we were discussing this that it was a solution to our lack of reserves. And again, just to renegotiate for sake of trying to get a better deal, it's not what I'm interested in doing. I'll finish with that.
I support what Councilmember White said about the origin of this whole action, where we did put them on notice, and that is correct. And at no time was there any consideration that the rates would be going up as part of this. I think that since we did just have a sewer increase, that then if we start to do an increase on trash at the same time, I wouldn't want to do it in the first place, but the fact that we just did that would make it even more odious to the public, that we started this and we ended up raising the rates would be very bad, and I wouldn't be supportive of that either. My comments about the services were just comments that I wanted to maintain as much as we possibly could, because that will be interpreted by the community as a rate increase. If you suddenly tell them that they no longer have this, that, or the other thing, they're pretty savvy, and they'll figure out that that's a way to just get more from them. And so I think that, if anything, whatever we get out of this, it better be better than what we have.
Mike, for me, we talked about this a while back. My preference is to put out an RFP so that we can see what it is that everybody else offers. I think there are other methods that are being used now. And my thought is if we don't, then we may get the opportunity to have a better rate, plus whether it's a large or small signing bonus, it's more than what we have today. So that's my 2 cents on it. And so I think that the competition in the marketplace could be key for us to drive down the rate, or to at least maybe increase the level of service or types of service when you compare with other waste haulers. That's my 2 cents.
On my side, I know we'll take the conversion, probably a good 1 year, maybe 6 months to 1 year on the conversion. But the thing is, being on the business, I would like to see really negotiate the rate. I mean, we don't want the public, again, all the comments on all the criticism coming from them to us. I mean, we got so much already, to deal with. And that would be great that if we could negotiate that, and then all the council and the mayor, I do agree on that, to have a competition out there. And I like to see that. Thank you.
May I make one more comment or question, Mayor?
Go right ahead.
Okay. So if there's 3 of us that want to go out to RFP, do we need to bring this back for an agenda item to discuss that, or can we give you direction on that tonight?
we can get direction tonight. We'll
Sure.
bring you back the RFP to authorize.
I would like to go out to RFP now rather than later.
I'm good with that.
I'm fine with that.
I prefer to negotiate first, but that's my, hard though,
It'll be hard.
with
yeah.
demands of what we want, and a short negotiation, and have to drag on.
I'm okay with going out to RFP.
So it'll take us a couple months to put an RFP together. So my recommendation would be based on timeline that we put that RFP out sometime after the first of the year. That'll give us a couple of months to work on it. You certainly don't want to put it out at the holidays.
If
And then
it's,
ask for it to be back.
if it's legal and allowable, I'm okay to hear offers from Waste Management before we get to the RFP.
I think once you put the RFP out, probably your best protocol is to let them submit.
But I'm saying until we put the RFP out. You just said it's gonna take a couple months to get
It will.
it together. So I just want them to know that, you know,
What we can tell them is, I think, is obviously the truth here is like, hey, we're gonna be going after RFP in January. And city council would be willing to consider your best offer.
absolutely.
Between now and then.
Or
but,
proposal, yeah.
So, put your best foot forward, but I think at this point, we probably should try to negotiate more with them.
I understand.
Before we go into RFP, and say, hey, they'd be willing to consider an offer. It's gotta be really good.
I understand.
So just a couple things for council to know as we move down this path. Might need to hire a consultant to help with the RFP, just because I'm a little bit blown out on the wastewater treatment plant. I can help oversee it, but actually getting down to writing it, they're fairly cumbersome. The second part is that Mr. Pinckney will not be able to represent us, so we'll be bringing in another attorney to do that. We've reached out to one. They actually are representing Waste Management and a couple workers' comp claims, and so we're actually looking for another one that doesn't have any representation over to Waste Management. So as soon as we get that nailed down, we'll get that information back out to the council.
I think a 10-year contract of this size justifies what you just asked for.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good.
If there's no more comments, everybody's all set, then I will adjourn the meeting at 9:03.